Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The night shift along I-77 had a particular quality that Trooper Asa Kincaid had learned to recognize over his 8 years patrolling the southeastern stretch of Ohio. It wasn't just the darkness or the relative emptiness of the highway after midnight. It was the way sound seemed to compress itself into a tight bubble around his cruiser. The way headlights appeared as distant stars before resolving into actual vehicles. And the way the Appalachian foothills created pockets of fog that settled into the valleys like something living and deliberate. Tonight carried all of those qualities, amplified by a weather system that had stalled over the region for the past 3 days, dropping the temperature into the low 40s and wrapping everything in a damp, clinging mist. Kincaid had started his shift at 10 p.m., rolling out from the station in Cambridge with a thermos of coffee that was already lukewarm and a logbook that needed updating. The first 2 hours had been routine, a speeding citation near exit 54, a welfare check on a stalled minivan whose driver had simply fallen asleep at a rest area, and the usual back and forth with dispatch about patrol coverage gaps. Eliza Bram's voice came through the radio with her characteristic efficiency, clipped and professional, but not unfriendly. She'd been working dispatch for nearly as long as Kincaid had been on patrol, and they'd developed the kind of working rhythm that required minimal explanation. By midnight, Kincaid was southbound between exits 47 and 44, a stretch of highway that paralleled an old railroad bed and cut through alternating patches of dense woodland and open farmland. The fog had thickened considerably in the past hour, reducing visibility to maybe 200 feet. His headlights carved a tunnel through the white-gray murk, and the mile markers appeared suddenly, reflective paint flashing briefly before disappearing behind him. He'd passed mile marker 46 about 3 minutes ago, which meant 45 should be coming up any moment. The radio crackled with static. Then Eliza's voice cut through. "Unit 7, what's your 20? Kincaid reached for the handset. "Just past mile marker 46, southbound I-77. Visibility's getting pretty bad out here." "Copy that. We've got reports of fog patches all along your route. Take it easy." "Will do." He replaced the handset and eased off the accelerator slightly, bringing his speed down to 50. The fog seemed to pulse around him, thinning momentarily to reveal the dark shapes of trees, then closing in again like a fist. That's when he saw the mile marker. Mile marker 46. Again. Kincaid's first thought was that he'd somehow gotten turned around, that in the fog and darkness he'd managed to reverse direction without realizing it. But that was impossible. The highway was a straight shot here, no exits, no turnarounds, just a steady southbound descent toward the next town. He checked his compass. Still heading south, still on the correct side of the divided highway. He keyed the radio again. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. Can you confirm my position? I'm showing mile marker 46 again." There was a pause, longer than usual. When Eliza responded, her voice carried a note of confusion. "Unit 7, your GPS shows you southbound past mile marker 45. You should be approaching 44 in about a minute." Kincaid looked at his dashboard GPS. It showed exactly what Eliza had described, a little blue dot moving steadily south, well past where he'd just seen the 46 marker. But his eyes told him something different. Through the fog, he could make out the reflective green sign clearly. Mile marker 46. "Dispatch, I'm looking right at mile marker 46. Physical marker, not GPS." Another pause. "Unit 7, stand by." Kincaid slowed further, pulling onto the shoulder. He put the cruiser in park and grabbed his flashlight, stepping out into the cold, damp air. The fog wrapped around him immediately, muffling all sound except the idle of his engine and the distant white noise of wind through the trees. He walked toward the mile marker, flashlight beam cutting through the mist. The sign was real. Solid green metal, reflective white numbers. 46. He reached out and touched it, felt the cold metal under his gloved hand, saw the slight rust at the bottom edge where moisture had corroded the paint. This wasn't a hallucination or a trick of the fog. This was an actual, physical mile marker. But according to his GPS, according to dispatch, according to every electronic system in his cruiser, he was at mile marker 45. The radio crackled again. Unit 7, can you describe what you're seeing? Kincaid returned to his cruiser, brushing droplets of condensation from his jacket. Standard Ohio DOT mile marker. Green, reflective, clearly marked 46, but my GPS says I'm at 45. That doesn't make sense. Eliza's voice had shifted from confused to concerned. Hold your position. I'm going to contact maintenance, see if there's been any signage errors reported in your area. Copy that. Kincaid sat in his cruiser, engine running. Heater fighting against the chill that seemed to seep through every seal and gap. He checked his odometer, tried to calculate the distance he'd traveled since the last marker he was certain about. The math didn't work. He should be at mile marker 44, maybe 43 if he'd been driving faster than he thought. But his eyes, his physical reality, insisted he was at 46. 20 minutes passed. The fog shifted and swirled, creating shapes that almost looked like figures standing just beyond the range of his headlights. But when he focused on them directly, they dissolved into nothing. The radio remained silent, except for occasional traffic from other units working different sections of the highway. None of them reported any anomalies. Finally, Eliza came back on. Unit 7, maintenance has no record of signage errors in your area. All mile markers were inspected 6 weeks ago and reported accurate. Can you provide a photo? Kincaid grabbed his phone and stepped back out into the fog. He took several photos of the mile marker from different angles, then returned to his cruiser and attempted to send them through the department's app. The upload failed. He tried again. Failed. The signal strength on his phone showed full bars, but the data simply wouldn't transmit. Dispatch, I can't get the photos to upload. Network's not cooperating. Okay, here's what we'll do. Continue south to the next marker. Confirm the number and call it in. We'll figure this out from there. Kincaid put the cruiser in drive and pulled back onto the highway. The fog seemed even thicker now, pressing against his windshield like something trying to get in. He drove slowly, watching his odometer tick up, waiting for the next mile marker to appear. It took exactly 1 mile of driving, confirmed by his odometer, before the next marker appeared in his headlights. Mile marker 46, the exact same marker. Same position relative to the guardrail, same small patch of rust at the bottom edge, same everything. Kincaid's hands tightened on the steering wheel. This wasn't right. This wasn't possible. He'd just driven a full mile south, watched his odometer confirm the distance, but somehow he'd ended up at the same marker he'd just left. He keyed the radio, trying to keep his voice steady. Dispatch, Unit 7, I've got a situation here. Go ahead, Unit 7. I just drove 1 mile south from mile marker 46. My odometer confirms the distance, but I'm looking at mile marker 46 again. Same marker, same exact location. The silence that followed was longer this time. When Eliza spoke again, her professional calm had developed a slight crack. Unit 7, that's not possible. Your GPS shows you at mile marker 44 now. You've been moving south at a steady pace. Eliza, I'm telling you what I'm seeing. Mile marker 46. third time now. Asa, are you feeling okay? Any dizziness, disorientation, headache? He ran a quick self-assessment. No symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning, no signs of stroke or medical emergency. He felt fine, physically. Mentally was another question. I'm fine, but something's wrong with this stretch of highway. Okay, listen. I want you to turn around, head north, get out of that area and report to the station. We'll send a unit to check it out in daylight. Kincaid was about to acknowledge when he saw the car. It appeared suddenly in his headlights, pulled over on the shoulder about 100 feet ahead. A dark sedan, maybe 10 years old, hazard lights blinking weakly through the fog. No one visible inside or standing nearby. Dispatch, I've got a vehicle on the shoulder. Dark sedan, appears unoccupied. I'm going to check it out, then head north. Copy that. Be careful. Kincaid activated his light bar and pulled in behind the sedan, positioning his cruiser for safety and visibility. He ran the plates through his system while pulling on his jacket and checking his flashlight. The registration came back clean. Vehicle owned by someone named Hollis McVeigh. Address in Marietta. No wants, no warrants, nothing unusual. He approached the sedan cautiously, flashlight sweeping the interior through the windows. Empty. Keys still in the ignition, engine off. The driver's door was unlocked. He opened it and leaned in, checking for any sign of medical emergency or foul play. The interior was neat, almost obsessively so. A thermos in the cup holder, still warm. A road atlas on the passenger seat, opened to a map of Ohio. And on the dashboard, a GPS unit that showed the same thing his cruiser's GPS showed, mile marker 44. But through the windshield, clearly visible in his flashlight beam, was the green sign, mile marker 46. Kincaid straightened up, scanning the area with his flashlight. The fog had become a solid wall now, reducing visibility to maybe 50 feet. Hello? Ohio State Police. Anyone need assistance? His voice seemed to die in the fog, absorbed before it could travel far. No response. No sound of footsteps or movement in the brush. Just the oppressive silence and the ever-present white noise of wind that might not have been wind at all. He returned to his cruiser and keyed the radio. Dispatch, vehicle is unoccupied but doesn't appear to be abandoned. Owner's belongings still inside, keys in ignition. No sign of the driver. Any indication of which direction they might have gone? Kincaid looked around, playing his flashlight across the foggy landscape. That's when he noticed something odd. The grass on the shoulder, the area where someone walking away from the car would have left a trail, showed no disturbance. No bent stems, no footprints in the soft earth at the edge of the pavement. It was as if the driver had simply vanished from inside the locked car. Negative. No tracks. No trail. Nothing. Unit 7, this is getting strange. I want you to secure the vehicle and head back to the station. We'll send a unit with a dog to track the driver in a few hours when the fog clears. Roger that, securing now. Kincaid returned to the sedan and reached in to remove the keys from the ignition, following standard procedure for an abandoned vehicle. As his fingers closed around the keys, he noticed something else. The odometer showed 45,668 miles. A sequence so neat it almost seemed deliberate. He made a note of it in his logbook, then removed the keys and locked the car. As he turned to walk back to his cruiser, his flashlight beam caught something on the ground near the sedan's rear bumper. A piece of paper, white and clean despite the damp conditions, held down by a small rock. He picked it up and unfolded it. The paper contained a single line of text, written in neat, precise handwriting. Ask Eliza about the other one. Kincaid felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. He looked at the sedan again, at the empty interior, at the mile marker 46 sign that shouldn't exist. Then he folded the paper carefully and put it in his pocket. Back in his cruiser, he sat for a moment collecting his thoughts. The note didn't make sense. Ask Eliza about the other one. The other what? The other vehicle? The other mile marker? The other missing driver? He keyed the radio. Dispatch, do we have any other reports of missing persons or abandoned vehicles in this area? Maybe in the past few weeks? There was a pause. Why do you ask? Just seems strange for someone to walk away from their car in this fog with no tracks, no trace, wondering if there's been a pattern. Another pause, longer this time. When Eliza responded, her voice had changed subtly, carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. Asa, where exactly are you right now? I need you to check your GPS and tell me exactly what it says. Kincaid looked at his dashboard display. GPS shows mile marker 44, just like before. But the physical marker says 46. And you said you drove a full mile between seeing the marker twice? Confirmed by odometer, yes. Okay, listen to me carefully. I need you to document everything you're seeing, every detail. Take photos, even if they won't upload. Write down times, observations, anything unusual. Can you do that? The change in her tone sent another chill through him. This wasn't standard procedure for a confused mile marker. This was something else. Eliza, what's going on? Just do it, Asa. Document everything. And whatever you do, don't leave that spot until I tell you to. Why? What happened here? The radio crackled with static, interference building. Through it, he heard Eliza's voice, broken and distant. The other one, 16 years ago. Same mile marker. Never found. Then the radio went dead. Complete silence, not even static. Kincaid checked his equipment. The radio appeared to be functioning, showing power, but producing no sound at all. He tried his cell phone. No signal now, despite showing full bars just moments ago. He was alone in the fog at a mile marker that didn't exist, with an abandoned car whose driver had vanished without a trace, and a note that suggested this had happened before. Kincaid sat very still, hands on the steering wheel, and watched the fog swirl outside his windows. Somewhere in that fog, he was certain, was an answer, but he wasn't sure he wanted to find it. The temperature inside the cruiser had dropped noticeably despite the heater running at full blast. His breath came out in small clouds. The windows began to frost over from the inside, ice crystals forming in delicate branching patterns. And in those patterns, if he looked at them just right, he could almost see shapes. Faces. Figures standing in the fog. Watching him. He reached for the note in his pocket, unfolded it again, and read the words by the light of his dashboard. Ask Eliza about the other one. 16 years ago, Eliza had said before the radio died. Same mile marker. Never found. Kincaid looked at the mile marker 46 sign through his fogging windshield. Then he looked at his GPS, still insisting he was at mile marker 44. Two different realities, occupying the same space. One electronic, one physical. One telling him where he should be, the other showing him where he was. Or maybe where he'd always been. The fog pressed closer, and in the distance, barely audible over the sound of his idling engine, he heard something that might have been a car door closing. Then another sound, footsteps on pavement, getting closer. Someone was walking toward his cruiser through the fog. Kincaid's hand moved to his sidearm, training taking over. He switched on his spotlight, aimed it towards the sound of the footsteps. The beam cut through the fog, revealing nothing. But the footsteps continued, steady and deliberate, coming from the direction of the abandoned sedan. Ohio State Police, identify yourself. The footsteps stopped, The fog swirled, forming shapes and dissolving them just as quickly. Then a figure emerged at the very edge of his spotlight's beam. A man, maybe 40 years old, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His face was pale, expression neutral, and he stood perfectly still, arms at his sides. "Sir, are you Hollis McVeigh? Is that your vehicle?" The man didn't respond. He just stood there at the edge of the light, not quite solid somehow, as if the fog were moving through him rather than around him. Kincaid opened his door and stepped out, one hand on his weapon, the other holding his flashlight. "Sir, I need you to show me your hands and identify yourself." The man raised one arm slowly and pointed. Not at Kincaid, not at the cruiser, but past them, down the highway to the south. The same gesture, Kincaid realized with growing unease, that was described in numerous witness reports he'd read over the years. The same gesture people claimed to see from figures standing on lonely highways late at night. Pointing. Always pointing. "Where are you pointing? What are you trying to show me?" The man's arm remained extended, finger aimed down the dark highway into the fog. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Or maybe the sound was there, but Kincaid couldn't hear it over the sudden rushing in his ears. The sense that reality was becoming unmoored, that he'd driven into something that operated by rules he didn't understand. He took a step towards the man. "Sir, I need you to answer my questions. Are you injured? Do you need medical assistance?" The man lowered his arm and looked directly at Kincaid. His eyes, pale in the flashlight beam, held an expression of profound sadness. Then he spoke, voice barely above a whisper but somehow perfectly clear despite the distance and fog. "3 more times. You'll see it 3 more times. Then you'll understand." "See what 3 more times? The mile marker?" "3 more times," the man repeated. "And each time you'll find something. Something that shouldn't be there. Something that was left behind." "Left behind by who? What are you talking about?" But the man was fading, becoming transparent, the fog moving through him more obviously now. Kincaid ran toward him, closing the distance, but by the time he reached the spot where the man had been standing, there was nothing. Just fog and empty highway and the distant sound of wind through trees. Kincaid spun in a circle, flashlight beam cutting through the mist, searching for any sign of the man. Nothing. He walked back to the sedan and checked inside again. Still empty. Still undisturbed. Keys still missing because Kincaid had them in his pocket. He was about to return to his cruiser when something caught his eye. On the sedan's trunk, written in the condensation, were words that definitely hadn't been there before. "Mile 46 doesn't exist. You're somewhere in between." Kincaid felt his professional calm beginning to crack. This wasn't a confused driver or a medical emergency or even criminal activity. This was something else entirely. Something that defied explanation, that operated by rules he couldn't grasp. He got back in his cruiser, locked the doors, and tried the radio again. This time it worked. "Dispatch, Unit 7, radio's back. Eliza, are you there?" "Asa, thank God. What happened?" "You went dead for almost 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Kincaid checked his watch. From his perspective, it had been maybe 5 minutes since the radio failed. But the dashboard clock confirmed what Eliza was saying. 30 minutes had vanished. Gone. Unaccounted for except by the memory of a conversation with a man who may or may not have been real. "Eliza, you said something about another one. 16 years ago. What did you mean?" The line was silent for a long moment. When Eliza spoke again, her voice was quiet, almost reluctant. "That's not something we talk about. It's not in any official report. I need to know. Please." He heard her exhale, a long, slow breath. 16 years ago, we had a trooper working this same section of highway, Name was David Carrick. Good officer, experienced, reliable. One night, he radioed in about an anomaly with the mile markers. Said he kept seeing the same marker repeatedly. Couldn't explain it. Dispatch told him to return to the station. But he didn't. He did, eventually. But when he got there, something was wrong with him. He filed his report, clocked out, and drove home. Next morning, he didn't show up for his shift. When we checked on him, we found him sitting in his car in his garage, engine off, just sitting there. He was conscious, but he wouldn't speak, wouldn't respond to questions, just sat there with this expression on his face like he'd seen something that broke him. Kincaid gripped the steering wheel tighter. What happened to him? Medical leave, then early retirement. He moved out of state, cut off contact with everyone from the department. Last I heard, he was in some kind of long-term care facility, psychiatric. And the mile marker he reported? Mile marker 46, same one you're looking at right now. The confirmation sent ice through Kincaid's veins. 16 years apart, 2 troopers, same location, same impossible anomaly. Eliza, what do you think is really going on here? I don't know. And maybe that's better. Maybe some things aren't meant to be understood. She paused. Asa, I want you to leave that area. Right now. Don't stop, don't investigate further, just drive north until you're clear. There's an abandoned vehicle here, I can't just leave it. Yes, you can. We'll send a team in daylight, but I need you to get out of there now. Kincaid looked at the fog pressing against his windows, at the mile marker that shouldn't exist, at the sedan with no driver and no footprints. Every instinct told him Eliza was right. Leave, get clear, let someone else deal with this in daylight when reality felt more solid. But the man's words echoed in his mind. 3 more times, you'll see it 3 more times. I will, he told Eliza. But first, I need to check something. The man I saw, he said I'd see the marker 3 more times. I need to know if that's true. Asa, don't, please, just leave. I'll be careful, I promise. He put the cruiser in drive and pulled back onto the highway heading south. The fog remained thick, impenetrable, but he drove slowly and steadily, watching his odometer, counting the distance. 1 mile, 2 miles, 3. At exactly 3 miles, according to his odometer, the mile marker appeared again in his headlights. Mile marker 46, 4th time now, and beside it, standing on the shoulder in the fog, was another figure. Not the man in the dark jacket this time. A woman, middle-aged, wearing a state police uniform. She stood at attention, facing the highway, and as Kincaid slowed his cruiser, she raised her hand in a salute. He stopped alongside her, window rolled down despite the cold. Ma'am, do you need assistance? The woman lowered her hand and walked toward his cruiser. As she got closer, Kincaid could see her uniform was old-fashioned, the style from maybe 20 or 30 years ago. Her nameplate read, Officer J. Whitmore. She leaned down to his window, and Kincaid saw that her eyes were the same pale color as the man's had been. When she spoke, her voice carried the same distant quality, as if coming from very far away. You're looking for answers, but the answers aren't here, they're ahead. 2 more times, Trooper Kincaid. 2 more times, and then you'll see what we've been trying to show you all along. What are you trying to show me? Who are you people? We're the ones who didn't make it out. The ones who drove into mile 46 and couldn't find their way back. But we're trying to help you. We're trying to make sure you don't end up like us. End up like what? What happened to you? Officer Whitmore smiled sadly. We disappeared into the space between things. The gap that shouldn't exist, but does. And now we're trapped here, watching everyone else make the same journey we did. Most of them make it through. But some of us get stuck. How do I get unstuck? You're not stuck yet. But you will be if you don't figure out what we're showing you. Look for the pattern. Look for what doesn't belong. Each time you see this marker, you'll find something that shouldn't be there, something we left behind as warnings. Find all 4 pieces, and you'll understand. She stepped back from the cruiser. 2 more times, Trooper. Make them count. Then she faded, dissolving into the fog like she'd never been there at all. Kincaid sat in his cruiser, hands trembling slightly, trying to process what was happening. This wasn't just a geographical anomaly or a trick of faulty equipment. This was something deeper, something that involved people who'd disappeared, who'd gotten lost in whatever this place was. He thought about Officer J. Whitmore, about David Carrick and his long-term care facility, about Hollis McVeigh vanishing from his sedan. How many others had there been? How many people had driven into mile marker 46 and never come back? The radio crackled. Eliza's voice urgent. "Asa, please respond. Please tell me you're okay." "I'm here. I'm okay." "Your GPS just went crazy. It showed you in 3 different locations at once, then it disappeared completely. Are you still at mile marker 46? Kincaid looked at his dashboard GPS. It showed nothing now, just a blank screen with an error message. Location not found. "Yeah, I'm still here. 4th time seeing the same marker." "4th? Asa, that's impossible. You've only been gone from your original position for 40 minutes. Even driving continuously, you couldn't have covered enough distance to see the same marker 4 times. Time was wrong here. Distance was wrong. The normal rules didn't apply. Eliza, I need you to do something for me. Look up an Officer J. Whitmore. Worked for the state police maybe 20 or 30 years ago. See if you can find any record of her." "Why? What does she have to do with this?" "I think she went missing in this same area. I think there have been others." He heard typing on a keyboard, then a long silence. When Eliza spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Jessica Whitmore. Disappeared in '97 while on patrol. Last known location was I-77, mile marker 46. Her cruiser was found on the shoulder, engine still running, but she was gone. No trace, no trail, no explanation. The case was never solved. 27 years ago. And she was still here, trapped in the fog at a mile marker that didn't exist, trying to warn others about the danger. "Asa, you need to get out of there. This isn't normal. This isn't something we can handle." 2 more times, he said, more to himself than to Eliza. She said 2 more times, and then I'll understand. 2 more times what? I'll see the marker 2 more times, and each time I'll find something. Something they left behind as a warning. "Asa, listen to me. Don't go any further. Turn around right now and drive north. Don't stop until you're clear of this area." But Kincaid was already putting the cruiser in drive. He had to see this through. Had to find the warnings, the pieces that would help him understand. Because if he didn't, he might end up like Officer Whitmore, like David Carrick, like all the others who'd disappeared into the space between mile markers. He drove south again, into the fog, into the impossible. Kincaid drove south through the fog, his odometer ticking off the miles with mechanical precision. 1 mile, 2 miles. The highway stretched ahead like a tunnel through the mist, and somewhere in that tunnel was another iteration of mile marker 46, another piece of the puzzle that these trapped souls were trying to show him. 3 miles according to his odometer. The marker should appear any moment now, but nothing came. Just endless fog and empty highway. 4 miles. 5. Still nothing. His GPS remained blank, showing only that location not found error message. The radio crackled with static, Eliza's voice breaking through in fragments. "I say, Position, reading, northern, respond. He keyed the handset. Dispatch, you're breaking up. Say again. GPS showing northern Ohio, near Cleveland. That's 100 miles from Cleveland. That was impossible. He'd been driving south continuously, never deviating from I-77. There was no way he could have traveled over 100 miles in the time that had passed. He checked his fuel gauge. Still 3/4 full, exactly what it had been when he first encountered the mile marker 46 anomaly. If he'd really driven that far, he should have burned through at least a quarter tank. The radio died completely, leaving only the hum of his engine and the whisper of tires on wet pavement. Kincaid felt a creeping sense of wrongness, like he'd driven off the edge of the map into some blank space where the normal rules of geography no longer applied. That's when he saw the lights. Red and blue, flashing through the fog ahead. Another state police cruiser pulled over on the shoulder with its light bar activated. Kincaid's training kicked in. Officer needs assistance. He activated his own lights and pulled up behind the cruiser, positioning his vehicle for safety. As he approached on foot, flashlight in hand, he could see someone sitting in the driver's seat, silhouetted against the glow of the dashboard. Ohio State Police. Everything okay here? The figure didn't move, didn't turn around. Just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead through the windshield. Kincaid tapped on the window with his flashlight. "Officer, are you all right?" Still no response. He tried the door handle, unlocked. He opened the door and immediately felt the wave of cold air that rushed out, far colder than the ambient temperature outside. His breath came out in clouds as he leaned in. The officer was wearing a state police uniform, but something about it was off. The fabric looked faded, worn in a way that suggested years of exposure to the elements rather than regular duty wear. The man's face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something Kincaid couldn't see. "Officer, can you hear me?" The man's lips moved, barely perceptible, forming words with no sound. Kincaid leaned closer, trying to hear, and that's when he saw the nameplate. D. Carrick. David Carrick. The trooper from 16 years ago. The one who'd disappeared into mile marker 46 and come back broken. But that was impossible. Carrick was in a psychiatric facility out of state. Eliza had confirmed it. This couldn't be him. Unless the figure's head turned slowly, mechanically, until his pale eyes met Kincaid's. When he spoke, his voice was distant, echoing, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "You're the 5th one this year, the 3rd one this month. We keep trying to warn people, but they don't listen. They think it's just fog, just equipment malfunction, just their minds playing tricks. But it's real, Trooper Kincaid. The space between mile markers is real, and once you're in it, you can't always find your way out. What is this place? What happened to you? I drove into the fog at mile marker 46 16 years ago. Thought I'd drive through it, thought I'd figure it out. But the marker kept appearing, kept repeating, and every time I tried to go back, I ended up further in. Eventually, I stopped seeing my own cruiser, started seeing others, other troopers who'd gotten lost here over the years. Some of them had been gone for decades. Carrick's hand moved slowly, pointing to something on the passenger seat. A logbook, its pages yellowed and water-damaged. I kept records. Everyone I saw, everyone who got trapped, their names, their badge numbers, when they disappeared. Take it, show people what's happening here. Maybe then someone will finally listen. Kincaid reached for the logbook, his hands trembling. The leather cover was cold and damp, and when he opened it, he saw pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. names and dates stretching back to 1952. Dozens of them. State troopers, sheriff's deputies, even a few civilians, all disappearing along this same stretch of highway. The marker you're looking for, Carrick continued, is about a mile ahead, 5th time you'll see it. And beside it, you'll find what I left behind. What we all left behind, our warnings. How do I get out of here? How do I make sure I don't end up like you? Carrick's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his pale eyes. You find all the warnings, you understand the pattern, and then you drive north and you don't stop until you see a mile marker that isn't 46. That's the only way out. But Trooper... He paused, and for the first time, something like emotion crossed his gray face. Some of us couldn't find our way out. Some of us are still here, still driving the same loop, still seeing the same marker. Make sure you're not one of us. Kincaid wanted to ask more questions, wanted to understand how this was possible, but Carrick was already fading, not disappearing like the others had, but becoming less substantial, his form growing translucent until Kincaid could see through him to the cruiser's interior. Remember, Carrick's voice echoed as he faded completely. Look for the pattern. It's all connected. Everything that's been left behind tells part of the story. Then he was gone, and Kincaid was standing beside an empty cruiser with a logbook in his hands. He looked at the vehicle's plate number. It matched the records he'd seen for David Carrick's assigned unit from 16 years ago. But this cruiser looked decades old, weathered and deteriorating, as if it had been sitting here exposed to the elements for far longer than 16 years. He returned to his own cruiser and examined the logbook under the dome light. The entries were methodical, documenting each disappearance with clinical precision. June 14, 1952, Trooper R. Ashford. Badge 217. Last seen mile marker 46, I-77. Cruiser found empty, engine running. No trace of officer. September 3, 1967. Deputy M. Tolliver, Wayne County. Responded to abandoned vehicle call near mile marker 46. Never returned. Vehicle and deputy never found. October 22nd, Acton, 1981. Civilian H. Sutton. Car found at mile marker 46. Personal belongings inside. No sign of driver. Extensive search yielded no results. The list went on and on. A catalog of disappearances spanning 7 decades. And at the end, in fresher ink, were the most recent entries. April 7th, 2024. Civilian H. McVeigh. Vehicle found abandoned at mile marker 46. April 7th, 2024. Trooper A. Kincaid. Last radio contact at mile marker 46. Status in progress. Kincaid stared at his own name in the logbook. Status in progress. As if his disappearance was already a foregone conclusion. As if Carrick had written it down knowing that Kincaid would end up in the same place all the others had. But the date was wrong. Today was April 7th, but the year was still 2024. Carrick couldn't have made these entries tonight. Unless time really was that unstable here. Unless the space between mile markers operated by rules that defied normal causality. He set the logbook aside and put his cruiser in drive. One more marker to find. One more warning to discover. Then he'd understand the pattern, and maybe, just maybe, he'd find his way out. The mile passed slowly, the fog pressing against his windshield like something alive. His headlights seemed weaker now, barely penetrating more than a few feet into the murk. The radio remained dead. His GPS still showed nothing. He was completely isolated, cut off from dispatch, from backup, from everything except the highway and the fog and whatever waited ahead. Mile marker 46 appeared in his headlights for the 5th time. And this time there was something else. Not a person, not a vehicle, but an object sitting on the shoulder directly beneath the mile marker sign. A cardboard box, weather-beaten but intact, with something written on the side in black marker. Kincaid stopped his cruiser and approached the box cautiously. The writing on the side read, "For whoever comes next, evidence of what they don't want you to know." He opened the box. Inside were stacks of files, documents, photographs. Official state police reports stamped and dated, documenting the disappearances he'd just read about in Carrick's logbook. But these weren't copies. These were original documents, some of them decades old, that should have been in evidence storage or archived at the state headquarters. Kincaid pulled out a file at random. The tab read, "Ashford, R. 1952, case closed." He opened it and began reading. According to the official report, Trooper Raymond Ashford had been found 3 days after his disappearance, alive and well, claiming he'd simply gotten lost in the fog and walked away from his vehicle. The case was closed as a medical episode, possibly a stress-induced fugue state. No further investigation required. But Kincaid had just read Carrick's logbook entry. Ashford was never found. The official report was a lie. He grabbed another file. Deputy Marcus Tolliver, 1967. Official conclusion. Left his position voluntarily, resigned from the department, moved out of state. But Carrick's entry said he disappeared and was never found. File after file, the pattern was the same. Official reports claiming the missing persons had been found or had left voluntarily, contradicted by Carrick's meticulous records showing they'd never been recovered. Someone had been covering this up. For decades, someone in authority had been falsifying reports, closing cases prematurely, hiding the truth about what was happening at mile marker 46. At the bottom of the box was a folder marked Confidential, Internal Affairs. Kincaid opened it and found a memo dated 1998, 1 year after Officer Jessica Whitmore's disappearance. The memo was from a senior administrator he didn't recognize, addressed to all district commanders. Regarding incidents at I-77 mile marker 46, all future reports of anomalous activity in this area are to be handled with maximum discretion. Media inquiries should be deflected. Missing persons cases should be closed as quickly as possible with explanations that avoid public alarm. The phenomenon has been studied by appropriate authorities and poses no ongoing threat to public safety. Officers who report persistent anomalous experiences should be referred for mandatory psychological evaluation. They knew. The department had known for decades that something was wrong with mile marker 46, and instead of investigating it properly, they'd buried it. They'd covered up disappearances, discredited witnesses, and forced officers who reported anomalies into psychiatric treatment. David Carrick hadn't gone to a care facility because he was broken. He'd been sent there to keep him quiet. Kincaid felt anger rising in his chest, mixing with the fear and confusion. How many people had been lost because the department had prioritized covering up the anomaly over solving it? How many families had been told their loved ones had simply left when the truth was they'd been swallowed by this impossible space between mile markers? He was about to close the box when he noticed one more item at the very bottom. A small evidence bag containing a piece of metal, twisted and scorched. The tag read, "Recovered from mile marker 46 site, 1952. Origin unknown." Kincaid held the bag up to his flashlight. The metal fragment was about the size of his palm, with strange markings etched into its surface. Not writing exactly, but symbols that looked almost like circuitry or mathematical equations. The metal itself was unlike anything he'd seen before, with an odd iridescence that seemed to shift colors in the light. This was what Officer Whitmore had meant. Each time he saw the marker, he'd find something left behind. First, the note in McVeigh's car. Then Carrick's logbook. Now this box of files and the strange metal fragment. Each piece revealing more about what was really happening here. But he still didn't understand the pattern. What connected all of these elements? What was the space between mile markers, and why did it trap people? The radio crackled suddenly, making him jump. Eliza's voice came through, clearer than before, but still distorted. "Asa, if you can hear me, found something. Old accident report from 1952. He grabbed the handset. "Eliza, I can hear you. What did you find?" "Major accident at mile marker 46. April 7th, 1952. Military convoy. One vehicle left the convoy and crashed. Fire. Explosion. They sealed off the area for 3 days, no explanation given. The same year, Trooper Ashford disappeared. The same year, this metal fragment was recovered. And the accident had happened on April 7th, exactly 72 years ago today." "Eliza, what kind of military convoy? What were they transporting?" "Doesn't say. Classified. But Asa, there's something else." A survivor from the accident gave a statement before he died. Said the vehicle was carrying experimental equipment. Something about spatial displacement testing. Navigation systems that could... The radio cut out again, but Kincaid had heard enough. Experimental military equipment. Spatial displacement. Navigation systems. The pieces were starting to come together. In 1952, a military vehicle carrying experimental equipment had crashed at this exact location. Whatever they'd been transporting had somehow damaged reality itself, creating a space between mile markers where the normal rules didn't apply. And for the past 72 years, that damaged space had been trapping people who drove into it. The metal fragment in the evidence bag might be a piece of that equipment, still affecting the area after all these decades, still creating anomalies, still warping space and time, still pulling people into a loop they couldn't escape. Kincaid looked at the mile marker 46 sign, then back at his cruiser. He had the information now. He understood the pattern. A military accident in 1952 had created this anomaly. The department had covered it up to avoid public panic and potential liability. And people had been disappearing here ever since, their cases falsified or explained away. But understanding the pattern didn't tell him how to escape it. He gathered the files and the metal fragment, loading everything into his cruiser. As he was about to close the box, he noticed something else. A photograph at the very bottom, stuck to the cardboard with old tape. He peeled it carefully and held it up to the light. The photo showed a group of people standing in front of what looked like a military truck. 7 people, all wearing civilian clothes but standing in a formal military formation. The photo was dated April 1952, and written on the back in faded pencil were the words, "Project Compass Rose, Final Transport." Kincaid studied the faces in the photograph. Young men and women, most of them looking serious, professional. Scientists, maybe, or engineers. One face in the back row caught his attention. A woman with the dark hair and intense eyes standing slightly apart from the others. Something about her seemed familiar. He flipped the photo over. Each person in the image had their name written below them in small print. The woman in the back row was identified as Dr. E. Bram, lead navigator. Bram. Like Eliza Bram, his dispatcher. That couldn't be a coincidence. But if this photo was from 1952, Dr. E. Bram would have to be over 90 years old by now. Unless... The radio crackled again. "Asa, can you hear me? I need you to listen very carefully. You need to drive north. Right now. Don't stop at any more markers. Don't investigate anything else. Just drive north until you see mile marker 47. Eliza, I found a photograph. Project Compass Rose. There's someone in it named E. Bram. That's your name. Your last name. A long silence, then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "That was my grandmother. She died before I was born. But my mother told me stories about her work, secret military research, navigation systems that were supposed to revolutionize long-distance travel. Something went wrong during a transport run. My grandmother was blamed for the accident. She committed suicide 6 months later. She was on the vehicle that crashed. Her equipment created this anomaly." "I know," Eliza said, and there were tears in her voice. "I've known since I started working dispatch. I requested this assignment specifically because I wanted to understand what really happened to her. I've been studying the disappearances for years, trying to find a pattern, trying to figure out how to fix what she broke. You knew people were getting trapped here and you didn't warn me? I didn't think it would happen to you. The incidents are rare, maybe 1 or 2 a year. And most people who experience the mile marker anomaly make it through safely. They see it once, get confused, drive away. But you kept going. You kept investigating. That's what triggers the deeper displacement. The more you engage with the anomaly, the deeper you get pulled in." Kincaid felt betrayed, angry, but he forced himself to focus. Anger wouldn't help him now. "How do I get out?" "Drive north. When you see mile marker 47, stop immediately. Don't pass it. That's the boundary. If you can reach 47, you'll be back in normal space. And if I can't reach it?" Eliza didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was small and broken. "Then you'll end up like David Carrick, like Officer Whitmore, like all the others. You'll be trapped in the space between markers, existing but not existing, there but not there." Kincaid got into his cruiser and looked at the mile marker 46 sign one more time. 5 times he'd seen it. 5 iterations of the same impossible location. But he wasn't going to see it a 6th time. He was going to drive north, find mile marker 47, and get out of this nightmare. He put the cruiser in drive and turned around, heading north. The fog seemed to fight him, pressing against the windshield, making it almost impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. His speedometer showed 40 miles per hour, but it felt like he was barely moving, like the road itself was resisting his progress. Miles passed. Too many miles. His odometer showed he'd traveled 15 miles north, which should have put him well past mile marker 47, past 50, approaching 60. But no markers appeared, just endless highway and fog. The radio crackled. "Asa, your GPS just came back online, but it's showing you at mile marker 46 still. You haven't moved." "That's impossible. I've been driving north for 20 minutes. My odometer shows 15 miles. I believe you. But according to our systems, you're stationary. You're not going anywhere." Kincaid looked at his odometer, watched the numbers ticking up as he drove. 15.3 miles. 15.4 miles. 15.5 miles. But if he wasn't actually moving, if he was somehow stationary despite the sensation of driving, he was on a treadmill, driving endlessly but never actually going anywhere. The space between mile markers was a loop, and he'd been driving in circles within that loop since the moment he first saw the marker repeat. "Eliza, I need you to tell me the truth. What was your grandmother working on? What was Project Compass Rose really about?" A long pause. Spatial compression. They were trying to create a navigation system that could compress the space between 2 points, allowing for faster travel. My grandmother believed she'd solved the equations, that she'd figured out how to fold space safely. But during the transport run, something went wrong. The equipment malfunctioned. Instead of compressing space, it fractured it, created a pocket dimension between mile markers 46 and 47, a space that shouldn't exist but does, and people who drive into that space get trapped. Only if they engage too deeply. Most people experience minor anomalies and drive through without realizing what happened. But you found McVeigh's car. You talked to the echoes. You collected the warnings. Each interaction pulled you deeper into the fractured space until you couldn't find your way back to normal reality. Kincaid's hands tightened on the steering wheel. So, what do I do? How do I disengage? I don't know. No one who's gotten as deep as you are has ever made it out. The fog ahead suddenly brightened, and through it, Kincaid saw something that made his blood run cold. His own cruiser, parked on the shoulder, light bar activated. He was approaching himself, seeing his own vehicle from the outside, as if he'd somehow lapped himself on this impossible highway. He stopped his cruiser and got out, approaching the other vehicle slowly. The driver's door was open, the interior lights on, and in the driver's seat was himself. Trooper Asa Kincaid, wearing the same uniform, looking straight ahead with the same pale, unfocused expression he'd seen on David Carrick's face. The other Kincaid's lips moved, forming words. "You're the 6th one this year, the 4th one this month." He was already becoming an echo, already starting to loop. If he didn't find a way out soon, he'd be trapped here forever. Another ghost warning future troopers about the danger they were driving into. Kincaid ran back to his cruiser and grabbed the metal fragment from the evidence bag. If this piece of equipment had created the fractured space, maybe it could help him navigate it. He held the fragment up, watching how the strange markings seemed to pulse and shift in the light. The symbols looked like equations, like mathematical instructions. And as he stared at them, something clicked in his mind. These weren't random markings, they were coordinates. Not GPS coordinates, but spatial coordinates. Instructions for how to fold space, how to create compression between 2 points. And if they showed how to compress space, maybe they also showed how to uncompress it. How to unfold the fractured dimension and return to normal reality. Kincaid studied the symbols, trying to understand their meaning. One set seemed to indicate a focal point, a center around which space could be folded. If he could find that focal point, maybe he could reverse the process. The radio crackled with Eliza's voice. "Asa, I'm reading a massive electromagnetic spike at your location. Whatever you're doing, it's affecting the equipment here. We're getting readings from multiple locations at once, like you're existing in several places simultaneously." The metal fragment was reacting to something, its markings glowing faintly. Kincaid looked around, trying to figure out what was causing the reaction. Then he saw it. The mile marker 46 sign. The fragment was pointing toward it, its glow intensifying as he turned in that direction. The focal point. The mile marker itself was the center of the fractured space. The location where the military vehicle had crashed, where Der Bram's equipment had malfunctioned, where reality had broken. Kincaid walked toward the sign, holding the fragment in front of him. As he got closer, the glow intensified, and the air around the marker began to shimmer and distort. He could see layers of reality superimposed on each other, multiple versions of the same location existing simultaneously. In one layer, he saw the highway as it appeared now, modern and well-maintained. In another, he saw it as it must have looked in 1952, narrower, with different signage. In a third layer, he saw something else entirely, a burned patch of ground, scorched earth where the military vehicle had crashed and exploded. All of these realities existed in the same space, folded on top of each other, creating a dimensional pocket where time and distance had no consistent meaning. And standing in the center of all these layered realities, barely visible through the distortion, was a figure. A woman in old-fashioned clothing, her form flickering between solid and transparent. She was looking directly at Kincaid with an expression of profound sadness and guilt. Dr. E. Bram, Eliza's grandmother. Still trapped here after 72 years, held in the fractured space created by her own equipment. Kincaid stepped closer, and the woman's form became more solid. When she spoke, her voice echoed across all the layered realities at once. I never meant for this to happen. We were trying to help people, to make travel faster, safer. But I miscalculated. I didn't account for the resonance cascade. And when the equipment failed, it tore a hole in space-time. I've been trapped here ever since, watching people disappear into the same mistake I made. How do I fix it? How do I get out? You can't fix it, not without the rest of the equipment, but you can escape. The fragment you're holding is a navigator. It's showing you the focal point, the center of the distortion. If you can reach the exact center and place the fragment there, it will create a temporary stability window. A moment when the folded space aligns with normal reality. That's your chance to step through, to get out. What about everyone else? The people who've been trapped here? Dr. Bram's expression grew even sadder. They're echoes now. Impressions left behind in the fractured space. They can't leave. They're part of the topology now, woven into the broken dimensions. But you still have mass, still have forward momentum. You can still escape if you act quickly. Kincaid looked at the mile marker, at the shimmering air around it. The center of the distortion was right there, just a few feet away. All he had to do was place the fragment at the exact focal point and wait for the stability window. But something made him hesitate. If I leave, what happens to you? To all the echoes? We remain. We've been here for decades, some of us. We're part of this place now. But someone needs to bear witness. Someone needs to survive and tell the truth about what happened here. That's why we tried to warn you. Not to trap you, but to give you enough information to escape, to be our voice in the world outside. Kincaid nodded. He understood. The warnings hadn't been threats. They'd been gifts. Information carefully arranged to give him the tools he needed to survive. He stepped up to the mile marker and pressed the metal fragment against the post, right at the base where all the layered realities converged. The fragment locked into place with a click that resonated across dimensions, and immediately the air around him began to stabilize. The fog pulled back. The shimmering distortion slowed and then stopped. For a brief moment, everything became crystal clear. He could see all the layered realities at once, all the versions of this location existing simultaneously. And in that moment of clarity, he saw them all. Every person who disappeared into mile marker 46 over the past 72 years. They stood together, transparent and flickering, watching him. Officer Whitmore gave him a salute. David Carrick nodded. Hollis McVeigh raised his hand in farewell, and Dr. E. Bram smiled, tears streaming down her translucent face. Go, she said, before the window closes, and tell my granddaughter I'm sorry. Tell her it wasn't her fault. Tell her to stop trying to fix what I broke. Kincaid ran. He sprinted back to his cruiser, threw himself into the driver's seat and hit the accelerator. The cruiser lurched forward, tires squealing on wet pavement, and suddenly the fog wasn't fighting him anymore. It was parting, revealing clear highway ahead. A mile marker flashed past. Mile marker 47. He'd made it. He'd crossed the boundary. He was back in normal space. The radio exploded with sound, multiple voices calling his unit number. Eliza's voice louder than all of them. Asa, Asa, we have you on GPS. You're at mile marker 47. Are you okay? He grabbed the handset with a shaking hand. I'm okay. I'm out. I made it. Thank God. Stay where you are. We're sending units to your location right now. Kincaid pulled over and put the cruiser in park. His hands were trembling, his heart was racing, but he was out, he was free. He'd escaped the space between mile markers. He looked in his rearview mirror back toward where mile marker 46 should be, but he couldn't see it, just normal highway disappearing into normal distance. No fog, no anomalies, no fractured dimensions, but he knew it was still there. The damaged space, the pocket dimension, the loop where echoes of lost people continued to exist in layered realities. It was all still there, hidden just beneath the surface of normal space, waiting for the next person to engage too deeply and get pulled in. Backup arrived 20 minutes later. 3 cruisers and a supervisor who wanted a full report. Kincaid told them everything. Showed them Carrick's logbook and the box of falsified files. Showed them the photograph of Project Compass Rose. The supervisor's expression grew more troubled with each piece of evidence. This is going to require a major investigation, internal affairs, probably federal involvement given the military connection. You're going to need to give a complete statement. I'll tell them everything, Kincaid said. Every detail. But first, I need to talk to Eliza. Privately. They let him use a cruiser's radio, cleared the channel for a private conversation. When Eliza's voice came through, he could hear the tears in it. Asa, I'm so sorry. I should have warned you more directly. I should have told you about my grandmother, about the real danger. I've been studying this for years, trying to find a way to fix it, and instead I almost got you killed. Your grandmother wanted me to give you a message. She said to tell you she's sorry and that it's not your fault. She said to stop trying to fix what she broke. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. Then, did you see her? Did you actually see my grandmother? I saw her. She's still there, trapped in the fractured space, but she's not suffering. She's... He paused, trying to find the right words. She's bearing witness. She and all the others. They're making sure no one else gets lost without leaving a warning first. Can they ever leave? Can they ever be freed? Kincaid thought about what Dr. Bram had told him, about being woven into the topology of the damaged space. No, they're part of that place now, but they're not alone. They have each other. He heard Eliza crying softly on the other end of the radio. After a moment, she composed herself enough to speak. Thank you for telling me, and thank you for making it out. You're the first person in 72 years to engage that deeply with the anomaly and escape. That means something. That means there might be hope for others. Or it means we need to seal off that section of highway, close it down, reroute traffic, stop anyone else from driving into that trap. The department won't do that. You saw the files. They've been covering this up for decades. They're not going to suddenly admit there's an unexplained spatial anomaly on a major interstate. They'll bury your report just like they buried all the others. She was probably right. But Kincaid had the evidence now. The logbook, the files, the photograph. And he had his own experience documented in real time through his GPS and radio communications. They couldn't bury all of it. We'll see, he said. We'll see what they try to do. The investigation that followed was exhausting. Federal agents, military intelligence, internal affairs investigators who seemed more interested in discrediting his story than understanding it. They confiscated all the physical evidence he'd collected, classified it, sealed it away where no one could access it. But they couldn't confiscate his memory. They couldn't seal away what he'd experienced, what he'd learned about the space between mile markers. David Carrick was quietly transferred from his psychiatric facility to a secure military research installation. Kincaid never saw him again, but he heard rumors that Carrick was helping them study the anomaly, using his decades of trapped existence to map the fractured space. The section of I-77 around mile marker 46 remained open. Traffic continued to flow, and occasionally someone would report seeing the same mile marker twice, or experiencing strange GPS errors, or finding an abandoned vehicle with no sign of the driver. Each time, the department would investigate briefly, then close the case with an explanation that avoided public alarm. The cover-up continued, just as it had for 72 years. But Kincaid had changed. He'd seen behind the curtain of normal reality. He'd experienced something impossible and survived. And he knew the truth. That space wasn't always stable. That reality had cracks in it. And that sometimes people fell through those cracks into places they were never supposed to go. He requested a transfer to a different patrol route. They approved it immediately, probably relieved to get him away from mile marker 46. He spent the next few years working routine traffic stops, helping stranded motorists, doing normal police work. But he never forgot. And sometimes, late at night when he was driving the empty highways, he'd think about the echoes trapped in the fractured space. About Dr. Bram and Officer Whitmore and David Carrick and all the others. Existing in layered realities bearing witness to the broken dimension they couldn't escape. He'd think about them and he'd say a quiet thank you. Because they'd saved him. Their warnings, their carefully arranged evidence, their willingness to reach across the boundary between normal space and fractured space, all of it had given him the information he needed to survive. They were still there, still trapped, still warning anyone who engaged too deeply with the anomaly at mile marker 46. And they would remain there, possibly forever, echoes in a pocket dimension created by a well-intentioned experiment gone catastrophically wrong. But they weren't forgotten. Kincaid remembered them. And someday, when someone finally had the courage and resources to truly investigate what had happened there, to acknowledge the truth instead of covering it up, maybe then the echoes could finally rest. Until that day, they would remain in the space between mile markers, watching, waiting, warning, and hoping that the next person who drove into their fractured reality would listen to the warnings and find their way out. 3 weeks after Kincaid escaped from mile marker 46, he received a call at 2 in the morning. The number was blocked, and when he answered, the voice on the other end was unfamiliar, male, with a flat, bureaucratic tone that immediately put him on edge. Trooper Kincaid, this is Agent Harlan from the Department of Defense Special Projects Division. We need to meet. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. at the Cracker Barrel off exit 52. Come alone, and don't mention this call to anyone. The line went dead before Kincaid could respond. He sat in his darkened bedroom, phone still pressed to his ear, feeling the familiar unease that had settled over him since his experience in the fractured space. They were watching him. Of course they were. He'd survived something that wasn't supposed to be survived, and now they wanted to control the narrative. He showed up at the restaurant 15 minutes early, choosing a booth in the back with a clear view of the entrance. When Agent Harlan arrived, he was exactly what Kincaid expected. Mid-50s, gray suit, expressionless face, carrying a leather briefcase that probably contained documents designed to intimidate or silence. Harlan sat down across from him without pleasantries. "You've created a problem, Trooper. Your report about mile marker 46 has raised questions we've spent considerable resources keeping buried. People have a right to know there's a dangerous anomaly on a public highway. Do they? And what exactly would that knowledge accomplish? Mass panic? Demands to close a major interstate artery that handles millions of dollars in commercial traffic annually? Conspiracy theories about government experiments?" Harlan shook his head. "The anomaly at mile marker 46 is contained. It poses minimal risk to the general public. The few individuals who experience severe displacement are statistical outliers." "Statistical outliers," Kincaid repeated. anger rising in his chest. "Is that what you call the dozens of people who've disappeared there over the past 70 years? Outliers? Tragic, yes, but unavoidable. We've studied the anomaly extensively. There's no way to close it, no way to repair the fractured space. The only options are to monitor it and minimize exposure, which is what we've been doing successfully for decades." Harlan opened his briefcase and removed a folder. "You're aware that all the physical evidence you collected has been classified. The logbook, the files, the photograph, the metal fragment. All of it is now under federal jurisdiction. Your official report has been sealed, and I'm here to ensure you understand the consequences of discussing this matter further." "You're threatening me." "I'm protecting you, and protecting the public from information that would cause more harm than good." Harlan slid the folder across the chole. "This is a non-disclosure agreement. Sign it, and you'll receive a substantial financial settlement. Compensation for the trauma you experienced. You can transfer to any patrol route in the state, or take early retirement with full pension, but you cannot discuss the events at mile marker 46 with anyone. Not colleagues, not family, not the media." Kincaid opened the folder and scanned the document. The settlement amount was significant, enough to set him up comfortably for life. But the restrictions were comprehensive. He wouldn't just be agreeing to stay silent, he'd be legally barred from ever speaking about what had happened. "And if I don't sign?" Harlan's expression remained neutral. "Then you'll find your career becomes very difficult, internal investigations into your conduct. Questions about your psychological fitness for duty, perhaps a forced medical retirement. We have considerable resources, Trooper Kincaid. Resources we're prepared to use to protect a secret that's been maintained for over 7 decades. It was exactly the kind of pressure Kincaid had expected. Carrot and stick. Sign and prosper, or refuse and be destroyed. The same tactics they'd probably used on David Carrick and every other witness who'd come close to exposing the truth. He closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. "I'm not signing." Harlan's eyes narrowed slightly, the first crack in his professional facade. "That's not a wise decision." "Maybe not, but it's my decision." Kincaid stood up. "Those people trapped in the fractured space, they saved my life. They gave me information, knowing it might help me escape. I'm not going to dishonor that by pretending it never happened. You're making a mistake. Probably. But I've gotten good at living with my mistakes." Kincaid walked out of the restaurant, half expecting to be stopped or followed, but nothing happened. He drove back to his apartment, parked, and sat in his car for a long time, thinking about what he'd just done. He'd refused a government non-disclosure agreement. He'd essentially declared war on an organization with vast resources and a 70-year history of successfully burying inconvenient truths. But what else could he do? The echoes in the fractured space deserved better than to be forgotten, classified away, dismissed as statistical outliers. The harassment started within days. Small things at first. His patrol routes were changed without explanation, assigning him to the most tedious, least desirable shifts. His reports were scrutinized with unusual intensity, minor errors that would normally be overlooked suddenly becoming subjects of formal review. Colleagues who'd been friendly began to distance themselves, as if associating with him had become professionally risky. Then, the psychological evaluation notice arrived. Mandatory assessment to determine his fitness for duty. The department psychologist, or Penelope Ashford, was someone Kincaid had never met before, brought in specifically for this evaluation. The session was held in a small, windowless office at the main headquarters. Dr. Ashford was in her early 40s, professional and detached, with the kind of clinical demeanor that suggested she'd been thoroughly briefed on what conclusions she was expected to reach. "Trooper Kincaid, I've reviewed your recent incident report regarding mile marker 46. It describes some very unusual experiences. I'd like to hear your account in your own words. Kincaid knew he was walking into a trap. Anything he said would be used to paint him as unstable, delusional, unfit for duty. But he also knew that lying or refusing to speak would achieve the same result. So he told the truth. All of it. The repeating mile marker, the abandoned vehicles, the echoes of trapped people, the fractured space created by failed military experiments. He described it clearly and calmly, presenting it as objective fact rather than subjective experience. Dr. Ashford listened without expression, taking notes. When he finished, she set down her pen and looked at him with what might have been sympathy. Trooper Kincaid, what you're describing is consistent with several psychological conditions. Dissociative episodes, stress-induced hallucinations, temporal disorientation. It's not uncommon for officers who work long night shifts in isolated areas to experience perceptual anomalies. I expected you to say that, but I have evidence. The logbook, the files, the communications with dispatch. My GPS data shows discontinuities that can't be explained by equipment malfunction. Your GPS data has been reviewed by technical experts. They've concluded that the anomalies are consistent with signal interference from weather conditions and terrain features. As for the logbook and files, those items are no longer available for independent verification because they were confiscated and classified, because they were deemed sensitive materials requiring special handling. Dr. Ashford leaned forward slightly. Trooper, I understand that what you experienced felt very real to you. But the human mind is capable of creating incredibly convincing false narratives, especially under conditions of stress and isolation. The fog, the darkness, the repetitive nature of highway patrol, all of these factors can contribute to altered states of consciousness. So, your professional opinion is that I imagined everything. My professional opinion is that you experienced a psychological episode that requires treatment. With proper therapy and possibly medication, you can recover fully and return to active duty. And if I refuse treatment? Dr. Ashford's expression hardened slightly. Then I'll have no choice but to recommend suspension pending further evaluation. Trooper Kincaid, I'm trying to help you here. Accept the treatment, acknowledge that what you experienced wasn't objectively real, and you can move forward with your career. It was the same ultimatum Agent Harlan had presented, just wrapped in therapeutic language. Admit you were wrong. Accept the official narrative, or be destroyed. Kincaid stood up. Thank you for your time, Doctor. I'll consider your recommendations. He walked out, knowing that he'd just failed the psychological evaluation. Within a week, he'd be suspended. Within a month, probably forced into medical retirement. His career as a state trooper was effectively over. But something strange happened. The suspension notice never came. Instead, he received a message through the department's internal communication system. Conference Room 3, Wednesday 2 p.m. Attendance mandatory. No explanation, no indication of who had called the meeting. When Wednesday came, Kincaid arrived at the designated conference room to find he wasn't alone. There were 5 other people there, all of them wearing state police uniforms, all of them looking as confused and wary as he felt. The door opened and Eliza Bram walked in, followed by a man Kincaid didn't recognize. Eliza looked tense, nervous in a way he'd never seen during all their radio communications. The man with her was older, maybe 60, with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades in law enforcement. "Thank you all for coming," the older man said, closing the door behind him. "My name is Captain Theodore Whitmore. Some of you may recognize that name." Kincaid felt a chill run down his spine. Whitmore, like Officer Jessica Whitmore, who'd disappeared at mile marker 46 in 1997. Jessica Whitmore was my daughter, Captain Whitmore continued. 27 years ago, she vanished while on patrol. The official report said she abandoned her post, that she walked away from the job and started a new life somewhere else. But I never believed that. Jessica loved being a trooper. She wouldn't have just disappeared. He looked around the room at each of them in turn. I've spent the past 2.5 decades investigating what really happened to her, collecting reports, interviewing witnesses, documenting every anomaly reported at mile marker 46. And I've identified a pattern. Officers who report experiencing the anomaly are pressured to recant, silenced through threats or payoffs, or forced out of the department entirely. One of the other troopers, a woman in her 30s, spoke up. "Why are we here, Captain? What do you want from us?" "I want the truth about mile marker 46 to finally come to light, and I believe that together we have enough collective evidence to make that happen." He gestured to Eliza. "Miss Bram has been conducting her own investigation into the anomaly. She's found connections between the disappearances that the official reports never acknowledged. Show them." Eliza opened a laptop and projected an image onto the screen at the front of the room. It was a map of I-77 with mile marker 46 at the center. Radiating out from that point were red dots, each one marked with a date. "These are all the documented incidents within a 5-mile radius of mile marker 46 over the past 72 years, Eliza explained. Disappearances, abandoned vehicles, reports of perceptual anomalies. There are 127 incidents total. The official explanation is that they're unrelated events that happen to cluster in the same area due to statistical chance." She clicked to the next slide, which showed a timeline. "But look at the pattern. The incidents spike dramatically on certain dates. April 7th, the anniversary of the original military accident. October 15th, which according to declassified documents was when they first attempted to retrieve the damaged equipment. And September 23rd, which was Dr. E. Bram's birthday." Another click, another image. This one showed photographs of multiple people. "These are victims whose cases were closed as voluntary disappearances or equipment malfunctions. But I've contacted their families. None of them believed the official explanations. They all described the same thing. Loved ones who were dedicated, reliable, had no reason to disappear. Yet their cases were closed quickly, with minimal investigation." Captain Whitmore took over again. "The government has been covering up the mile marker 46 anomaly for over 7 decades. They've falsified reports, intimidated witnesses, and allowed people to disappear into that fractured space rather than admit the truth. But they can't silence all of us. Not if we stand together." Kincaid looked around the room at the other troopers. He could see the same conflict in their faces that he felt. The desire to expose the truth warring with the knowledge of what it would cost them professionally and personally. "What exactly are you proposing?" one of the male troopers asked. "A coordinated disclosure. All of us going public simultaneously with our experiences and evidence. Contact the media, state legislators, federal oversight committees. Create enough noise that they can't bury it with their usual tactics. They'll destroy our careers," the female trooper said. "You know they will." "Probably," Captain Whitmore acknowledged. "But they'll have destroyed them anyway. Everyone in this room has been targeted for forced retirement or psychological disqualification. We're already marked as problems to be eliminated. At least this way, we go down fighting for something that matters." Eliza spoke up again, her voice quiet but firm. "My grandmother created that anomaly. She spent the last 6 months of her life racked with guilt over what her experiments had done. She killed herself because she couldn't live with the knowledge that her work had created a trap that was swallowing people. I owe it to her memory to make sure the truth comes out, to make sure no one else disappears into that fractured space without the world knowing why. Kincaid thought about the echoes he'd encountered. Officer Whitmore giving him a salute, David Carrick sharing his logbook, Dr. Bram creating a stability window so he could escape. They'd all sacrificed themselves to help him survive, to give him the information he needed to make it back to normal space. "I'm in," he said. "Whatever you need from me, I'm in." One by one, the others agreed. 6 people, all of them facing the end of their careers, choosing to speak truth to power rather than accept the comfortable lie. Over the next 2 weeks, they prepared. Captain Whitmore had contacts in the state legislature, representatives who'd been asking questions about unexplained incidents on state highways. Eliza compiled all the evidence she'd gathered over years of quiet investigation. The other troopers documented their own experiences, creating a comprehensive picture of the anomaly's effects. And Kincaid wrote everything down, every detail of his time in the fractured space, every conversation with the echoes, every piece of evidence he'd collected before it was confiscated. He wrote it as clearly and objectively as possible, presenting it not as a supernatural story, but as a documented anomaly requiring scientific investigation. The disclosure was scheduled for a Monday morning. They'd arranged simultaneous press conferences in Columbus, Cleveland, and Cincinnati. State legislators would be making statements. Media outlets had been briefed. It was designed to be too big, too coordinated to simply bury. The night before, Kincaid couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what would happen the next day. The fallout, the investigations, the inevitable attempts to discredit them all. But he also thought about the echoes still trapped in the fractured space, and he knew they were doing the right thing. At 2 a.m., his phone rang. Blocked number again. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Trooper Kincaid, this is Agent Harlan. I know what you're planning to do tomorrow. I'm calling to give you one last chance to reconsider." "I'm done reconsidering. The truth needs to come out. The truth will cause more harm than good, but I'm not calling to threaten you this time. I'm calling to warn you. There are elements within the military and intelligence community who view the mile marker 46 anomaly as a strategic asset. They've been studying it, trying to understand how to weaponize spatial displacement technology. If you expose the anomaly publicly, you won't just be ending your career. You'll be putting yourself and everyone you care about in genuine danger. Is that a threat? It's a statement of fact. These people don't play by normal rules. They've disappeared witnesses before, permanently. I'm part of the containment team, not the elimination team, but there are others who have different methods. Kincaid felt ice in his veins. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think you're a good cop who genuinely believes he's doing the right thing. And because my daughter was one of the people who disappeared at mile marker 46 30 years ago. I know what it's like to lose someone to that anomaly and have no one believe you." There was a long pause. "If you go through with this tomorrow, make sure you have protection. Real protection. Don't be alone, don't follow predictable patterns, and watch for anyone showing unusual interest in you or your colleagues. And Trooper, I hope you succeed. I hope you finally expose what we've been covering up, but be prepared for the consequences." The line went dead. Kincaid sat in the darkness, phone in hand, processing what he'd just heard. Agent Harlan had a daughter who'd disappeared at mile marker 46. That changed the context of their previous conversations entirely. Harlan wasn't just a bureaucrat protecting government secrets. He was a father who'd lost a child and spent decades covering up the truth because he believed it was necessary. But that didn't make it right. It didn't justify the decades of lies and cover-ups. It didn't excuse the families who'd been told their loved ones had simply walked away when the truth was they'd been swallowed by a fractured dimension. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Kincaid met with the others at Captain Whitmore's house before the press conferences. They went over the plan one more time, coordinated their statements, made sure everyone knew their role. At 9:55 a.m., 5 minutes before the scheduled start, Eliza's phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, then her face went pale. "They're canceling us. All 3 press conferences. The venues received bomb threats. They're evacuating the buildings right now." Captain Whitmore swore. "They're trying to stop us. But we can still make statements online, social media, direct to the public." "No," Eliza said, still listening to her phone. "They're saying the bomb threats mentioned us by name. Mentioned the mile marker 46 disclosure. They're framing this as terrorism, like we're violent extremists rather than whistleblowers." It was a brilliant tactical move. By associating the disclosure with terrorism, they'd poisoned the well before anyone could even hear the truth. Any statement they made now would be viewed through the lens of criminal activity. Kincaid felt the familiar weight of defeat settling over him. They'd been outmaneuvered. The system they were fighting had too many resources, too much experience at burying inconvenient truths. But then his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Loading dock, Warehouse District, 30 minutes. Come alone, I can help. JW. JW." Jessica Whitmore. But that was impossible. She'd been gone for 27 years, trapped in the fractured space as an echo. Unless... Kincaid looked at Captain Whitmore. "I need to check something. I'll be back in an hour. Asa, we need to figure out our next move. The press conferences are dead, but we can still..." "I know, but I need to check this first. Trust me." He drove to the warehouse district, following GPS coordinates included in the text message. The loading dock was at the back of an abandoned building, isolated from the rest of the area. Every instinct told him this was a trap, that he was walking into something dangerous. But he had to know. A figure was waiting for him in the shadows of the loading dock. When she stepped into the light, Kincaid's breath caught. She looked exactly like the photograph he'd seen in Captain Whitmore's house. Jessica Whitmore, wearing a state police uniform that looked decades old. Her face showing no signs of aging despite the 27 years that had passed. "You escaped," she said, her voice carrying that same distant quality all the echoes had. "You made it out of the fractured space. Very few people do that. You sent me the text message, but how? You're an echo. You're trapped at mile marker 46. I was. But something changed when you placed that metal fragment at the focal point. The stability window you created didn't just let you escape. It created a brief moment of permeability in the barrier between the fractured space and normal space. Some of us, the ones who'd been there longest, who'd become most integrated with the topology of the damaged dimension, we were able to slip through. We're not fully here, not fully solid, but we're not completely trapped anymore either." She gestured to the shadows behind her. Other figures emerged. David Carrick, looking more substantial than he had in the fractured space, but still not quite solid. Hollis McVeigh, the driver whose abandoned sedan had been the first warning Kincaid encountered. And others, dozens of them, all wearing clothes from different eras, all carrying the same translucent quality. "We've been watching your attempts to expose the truth," Jessica continued. "And we want to help. We can't testify in court, can't appear on camera, but we can provide evidence. Physical evidence that proves we existed, that we disappeared, that the official reports were falsified." "What kind of evidence?" David Carrick stepped forward, holding something that slowly materialized in his hands as he became more solid. A metal box, weathered and old. This contains items we recovered from the fractured space, personal belongings of people who disappeared, things that were never found during official searches because they fell into the damaged dimension. DNA evidence, fingerprints, proof that we were all at mile marker 46 when we vanished. Jessica added, and we have something else. Recordings. Some of us were able to manipulate the electromagnetic fields in the fractured space, creating imprints of our experiences. Audio and visual data showing what really happens when someone gets trapped. The government destroyed the physical evidence you collected, but they can't destroy what exists in the fractured space itself. Kincaid took the metal box, feeling its solid weight. This changed everything. They'd lost the press conference opportunity, but with this evidence, they could build a legal case. Force an investigation through the courts rather than through public opinion. Why are you helping us now? Why didn't you do this before? Because we couldn't, Jessica said sadly. We were too trapped, too deeply woven into the damaged dimension. But you changed something when you escaped. You proved it was possible to interact with the fractured space and return. That gave us hope. That gave us the strength to reach back across the barrier. She looked at Kincaid with an expression that reminded him painfully of her father. Tell my dad I'm sorry I couldn't come home. Tell him I didn't abandon him, that I've been trying to find my way back all these years. And tell him, her voice broke slightly, tell him to stop blaming himself. None of this was his fault. You could tell him yourself. Come back with me. Jessica shook her head. We can't maintain solidity for long outside the fractured space. A few minutes, maybe an hour, if we push ourselves. Then we're pulled back. The damaged dimension is part of us now. We're tethered to it. Then there's no way to free you? No way to bring you back permanently? Not unless someone can repair the fractured space itself. Close the dimensional breach. Restore the spatial topology to its original state. But that would require technology we don't have. Understanding of spatial mechanics that barely exists even in classified research. Kincaid thought about the metal fragment he'd placed at the focal point, about Dr. Bram's equations etched into its surface. What if we could recover more of the original equipment? The fragments that were never found after the 1952 crash. Could they be used to repair the damage? The echoes looked at each other, communicating in ways that transcended normal speech. Finally, Jessica spoke again. The main component is still at the crash site. It was too damaged to retrieve, too dangerous to move, so they buried it, sealed it in concrete, built the highway over it. The metal fragment you found was just a navigation module. The core processor, the piece that actually manipulates spatial dimensions, is still there, buried under mile marker 46. If someone could excavate it, recover it, then maybe, with enough time and resources and expertise, it could be studied, understood, possibly even reversed. Jessica's expression showed both hope and skepticism. But the government has spent 70 years ensuring no one gets that chance. They're not going to allow excavation now. Kincaid looked at the box of evidence in his hands, then back at the assembled echoes. A plan was forming in his mind. Risky, probably impossible, but it was the only path he could see that led to actual resolution rather than just exposure. What if we forced them to excavate? What if we made the anomaly too dangerous to ignore, too public to keep covering up? David Carrick smiled, the first real expression Kincaid had seen on his face. You're thinking like someone who understands how the fractured space works. Go on. The stability window I created by placing the fragment, it changed the permeability of the barrier. What if we created another one? a bigger one. Made the fractured space leak into normal space in a way that couldn't be denied or explained away. That would be dangerous, Jessica warned. If the breach widens too much, you could destabilize the entire area. Mile marker 46 could expand, swallowing more of the highway, more of the surrounding land. You'd be creating exactly the kind of catastrophic scenario the government has been trying to prevent. But they'd have to respond. They'd have to bring in their experts, their equipment. They'd have to excavate the core processor and attempt repairs. And during that process, the truth would come out. It would be too big to cover up. The echoes considered this, their translucent forms flickering slightly as they communicated. Then Jessica nodded. It's risky, but it might work. We can help create the breach from our side, manipulating the electromagnetic fields in the fractured space to amplify whatever you do from normal space. But you'd need to be careful, very careful. Once the process starts, we might not be able to stop it. How would I even create a stability window big enough to matter? I don't have the fragment anymore, it was confiscated. You don't need the fragment, David Carrick said. You need to understand what the fragment was doing. It was resonating at a specific frequency, creating harmonic interference with the damaged spatial field. Any sufficiently powerful electromagnetic source could do the same thing if properly calibrated. Kincaid thought about the resources available to him. A state police cruiser with its radio equipment, its emergency lights, its various electronic systems. If he could modify the equipment to broadcast at the right frequency. I'll need help, technical expertise I don't have. We'll guide you, Jessica said, through the echoes. When you go back to mile marker 46, we'll be able to communicate more easily. The fractured space enhances our ability to interact with normal reality. We can show you what frequencies to use, what modifications to make. She extended her hand, and slowly, carefully, Kincaid shook it. Her hand felt cold and not quite solid, like shaking hands with freezing mist. But the gesture was real, the commitment genuine. One more thing, Jessica said as the echoes began to fade. When you create the breach, it's going to attract attention. Not just from the government, but from the anomaly itself. The fractured space has developed something like awareness over the decades. It protects itself, draws in anyone who threatens its existence. You'll be walking into significant danger. I've been there before, I made it out. You made it out because we helped you, because we wanted you to escape and tell the truth. But if you come back trying to destroy the fractured space, we won't be able to help the same way. We're part of that space now. Threatening it threatens us. Kincaid understood. By attempting to repair the damaged dimension, he'd be risking the existence of everyone trapped within it. If the process went wrong, if the fractured space collapsed instead of being repaired, all the echoes might be destroyed. I'll do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen. We know. That's why we're trusting you. Jessica smiled sadly. Go save the living, Trooper Kincaid. And if you can, save us too. But if it comes down to a choice between sealing the fractured space and preventing more disappearances, or keeping it open to preserve our half-existence, choose the living. We've already lost our chance at life. Don't let anyone else lose theirs. Then the echoes faded completely, dissolving into the morning light, and Kincaid was alone on the loading dock with a box of evidence and a plan that would probably destroy his career and possibly his life. But it was the right thing to do, the only thing that made sense. He drove back to Captain Whitmore's house and explained everything. The captain listened with an expression that cycled through disbelief, hope, and pain, as Kincaid described his meeting with Jessica's echo. When Kincaid finished, Captain Whitmore was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. My daughter. She's been trying to come home all these years. She wants you to know it wasn't your fault. None of this was your fault. Is she suffering in that fractured space? Kincaid thought about how to answer that honestly. She's not in pain, but she's not at peace either. She's trapped between states, existing but not living. She deserves better. They all do. Captain Whitmore nodded, wiping his eyes. Then let's give it to them. Tell me what you need. They spent the rest of the day planning. Kincaid would return to mile marker 46 after dark, when traffic was minimal. He'd use his cruiser's electronic systems to create an electromagnetic pulse at the frequency the echoes would guide him to. If everything worked correctly, he'd create a stability window large enough to make the fractured space visible from normal reality, undeniable to anyone in the area. The government would respond with their containment teams, their experts, their equipment. And in the chaos of that response, the truth would emerge. The media would arrive, drawn by reports of strange phenomena. State officials would demand answers. The cover-up would collapse under its own weight. At least, that was the plan. As night fell and Kincaid prepared to leave, Eliza pulled him aside. You know, this could go very wrong. You could get trapped in there again, or worse. I know. But what's the alternative? Let them keep covering it up? Let more people disappear into that fractured space? No, She paused, gathering her thoughts. My grandmother spent her last months drowning in guilt over what her experiment had done. I don't want you to end up the same way. Whatever happens tonight, whatever the consequences, remember that you're trying to fix something that's been broken for 70 years. That matters. Your grandmother tried to fix it too. That's how she ended up trapped in there. Which is why you need to be smarter than she was. Don't sacrifice yourself trying to save everyone. Promise me. Kincaid couldn't make that promise, so he just nodded and headed for his cruiser. The drive to mile marker 46 took 40 minutes. He'd requested that no other units patrol that section tonight, citing equipment testing. The request had been approved without question, probably because the department was still trying to figure out how to handle his pending psychological disqualification. As he approached the familiar stretch of highway, he felt the atmosphere change. The air grew heavier, charged with electromagnetic tension. The fog was rolling in again, just like it had been the first night he'd encountered the anomaly. Mile marker 46 appeared in his headlights. The same green sign, the same reflective numbers. But this time, Kincaid wasn't afraid. He knew what he was facing. He understood the danger. He pulled over on the shoulder, positioning his cruiser exactly where he'd found Hollis McVeigh's sedan weeks earlier. Then he began making the modifications the echoes had described. Rewiring his radio transmitter, adjusting his light bar's frequency, creating a makeshift resonance device from his cruiser's electronic systems. As he worked, he felt the familiar coldness in the air that signaled the presence of echoes. Jessica Whitmore materialized beside his cruiser, more solid than she'd been at the warehouse. You came back, she said. I said I would. We're ready on our side. When you activate the resonance device, we'll amplify the signal from within the fractured space. It should create a breach large enough to be unmistakable. And if it creates a breach too large, if the fractured space starts expanding uncontrollably, then we shut it down as fast as we can and hope for the best. Jessica's expression was grim. This is dangerous, Trooper. Last chance to reconsider. Kincaid looked at the mile marker, at the spot where so many people had disappeared over the decades. Then he looked at Jessica's translucent form, at the evidence of a life interrupted, a person trapped between existence and non-existence. No reconsideration. Let's do this. He activated the resonance device. Immediately, his cruiser's electronic systems began pulsing with energy. broadcasting electromagnetic waves at precisely calibrated frequencies. The light bar flickered and strobed with patterns that hurt to look at. The radio emitted a sound that was part static, part musical note, part something else entirely. And the space around mile marker 46 began to shimmer. At first, it was subtle, just a heat haze distortion in the air around the sign, but it grew quickly, the distortion spreading outward in concentric circles. The fog thickened and began to glow with an eerie phosphorescence, and through the glow, Kincaid could see them. The echoes. Hundreds of them. People from every decade since 1952. All of them trapped in the fractured space. All of them suddenly visible from normal reality. They stood in groups, in families, some holding hands, some alone. All of them translucent. All of them flickering between solid and transparent. And behind them, the fractured space itself became visible. Layers of reality folded and compressed, creating impossible geometries. Multiple versions of the highway existing simultaneously, overlapping, interpenetrating. Past and present and future all occupying the same space, creating a kaleidoscope of temporal and spatial distortion. It was beautiful and terrifying, and absolutely undeniable. Kincaid grabbed his phone and started recording. The government could confiscate this footage, but not before he'd uploaded it to multiple cloud servers. Not before he'd shared it with the media contacts Captain Whitmore had cultivated. The breach continued to expand. The phosphorescent glow now extended 100 feet in every direction from mile marker 46. Cars on the highway were slowing, drivers staring at the impossible sight. Some of them were pulling over, getting out of their vehicles, phones raised to record. Perfect. The more witnesses, the harder it would be to cover up. But then Kincaid felt the pull. The same sensation he'd experienced during his first encounter with the anomaly, like invisible hands trying to drag him into the fractured space. The breach he'd created wasn't just making the anomaly visible. It was making it active, hungry, pulling at anyone nearby. Jessica felt it too. It's destabilizing faster than we expected. You need to shut it down now before... She was cut off by a sound like reality tearing. The breach suddenly expanded, doubling in size, tripling. The phosphorescent glow became blinding, and the pull became irresistible. Kincaid felt himself being dragged toward mile marker 46, his feet sliding on the pavement despite his efforts to resist. Around him, the civilians who'd stopped to watch were experiencing the same thing, crying out in fear as they were pulled toward the breach. He'd created a catastrophe, exactly the kind of scenario the government had been trying to prevent. But then the echoes moved. Jessica Whitmore and David Carrick and all the others, hundreds of trapped souls acting in concert, formed a barrier between the breach and the normal world. They used their own existence, their integration with the fractured space, to absorb the pull, to redirect the force away from the living. It was costing them. Kincaid could see it. The echoes were destabilizing, their forms flickering more rapidly, starting to break apart under the strain. "Jessica, stop. You're destroying yourselves. Better us than the living," she called back. "Shut it down, trooper, now!" Kincaid scrambled back to his cruiser and killed the resonance device. The electromagnetic pulse stopped. The breach began to contract, slowly at first, then faster. The phosphorescent glow dimmed. The pull weakened, but the echoes were fading. The effort of holding back the breach had taken too much from them. They were dissolving, their translucent forms becoming more transparent with each passing second. "No," Kincaid whispered, watching Jessica Whitmore's form flicker and dim. No, this wasn't supposed to happen. Jessica looked at him one last time, her voice barely audible. "Tell my dad. Tell him I loved him. Tell him I'm finally..." free. Then she was gone. Not just faded, but gone completely. And with her, dozens of other echoes dissolved into nothing. Their existence finally, truly ended. The breach collapsed completely, leaving only normal highway and dissipating fog. The civilians who'd been pulled toward it were scattered across the shoulder, shaken but alive. And Kincaid stood beside his cruiser, watching the last traces of phosphorescence fade from the air, knowing he'd just witnessed the true death of people who'd been trapped for decades. He'd succeeded in making the anomaly undeniable. Dozens of people had recorded the event. The footage would be spreading across social media already. The government couldn't cover this up, but the cost had been higher than he'd expected. The echoes who'd helped him, who'd saved the living by sacrificing what remained of their own existence, were gone. Not trapped anymore, but not rescued either. Just ended. Sirens approached from both directions. Emergency vehicles, state police units, probably federal response teams. The cavalry was coming exactly as he'd planned, but Kincaid felt hollow. Victory and loss mixed together in a way that made it impossible to celebrate. Captain Whitmore would need to know that his daughter had saved lives tonight, that her final act had been one of heroism, that she'd chosen to protect others even at the cost of her own continued existence. The investigation that would follow, the exposure of the cover-up, the demands for answers about the fractured space, all of that would happen now. The truth would come out, but the echoes who'd made that truth possible wouldn't be there to see it. Kincaid sat down on the ground beside his cruiser, exhausted and grief-stricken, and waited for the authorities to arrive. The federal response team arrived within 30 minutes. Black SUVs with government plates, unmarked vehicles carrying men and women in dark suits who immediately established a perimeter around mile marker 46. They confiscated phones from the civilian witnesses, took statements with the kind of efficiency that suggested this wasn't their first anomalous incident, and cleared the area with polite but absolute authority. Kincaid was placed in the back of one of the SUVs, not under arrest exactly, but not free to leave either. Agent Harlan sat across from him, his expression unreadable. "You created exactly the kind of public exposure we've spent 7 decades preventing," Harlan said quietly. "Dozens of witnesses, video footage already spreading online, media outlets are picking up the story. You've made it impossible to contain. That was the point. Was it worth it? The echoes you worked with, the ones who helped you create that breach, they're gone now. Permanently. You didn't rescue them. You destroyed them." The words hit Kincaid like a physical blow because they were true. Jessica Whitmore, David Carrick, all the others who'd sacrificed themselves to hold back the destabilizing breach, they weren't trapped anymore, but they weren't free either. They were simply erased. They made that choice, Kincaid said, but his voice lacked conviction. They chose to protect the living. They made that choice because you put them in a position where there was no other option. You created an uncontrolled breach, destabilized the fractured space, and they had to sacrifice themselves to prevent a catastrophe. That blood is on your hands, trooper. Kincaid wanted to argue, to defend his actions, but what defense was there? Harlan was right. He'd been so focused on exposing the truth, on forcing the government's hand, that he hadn't adequately considered the cost to the echoes who'd helped him. "What happens now?" he asked instead. "Now we do damage control. The footage is already being analyzed by our technical teams. They'll release a statement attributing the visual phenomena to a combination of weather conditions, atmospheric disturbance, and mass hysteria. The witnesses will be offered settlements in exchange for non-disclosure. And you," Harlan paused, "you'll be given a choice. Prison for domestic terrorism and reckless endangerment of civilian lives, or cooperation. What kind of cooperation? Help us excavate the core processor buried beneath mile marker 46. You've demonstrated an understanding of the fractured space that our experts lack. You've interacted with it, survived it, manipulated it. We need that expertise if we're going to attempt repairs. It was the outcome Kincaid had hoped for when he'd created the breach, forcing the government to take action, to finally address the damaged dimension instead of just covering it up. But it felt hollow now, tainted by the cost of getting here. And if the excavation works, if you can repair the fractured space, then we close the dimensional breach, restore spatial stability, and hopefully prevent any future disappearances. Harlan's expression softened slightly. My daughter is gone. Permanently. The echoes are gone. But we can still save the people who haven't disappeared yet. We can still close the trap before anyone else falls in. Kincaid nodded slowly. I'll help. But I want Captain Whitmore involved, and Eliza Bram. They've earned the right to see this through. Agreed. In fact, we'll need Miss Bram's expertise. She's been studying her grandmother's equations for years. She might be able to help us understand how to reverse the spatial compression. Over the next week, preparations began for the excavation. It was an enormous undertaking, requiring the closure of a major interstate highway, the deployment of specialized drilling equipment, and the coordination of multiple government agencies. The official cover story was underground infrastructure repair, but anyone paying attention could tell this was something bigger. The media coverage of the mile marker 46 incident had been intense but brief. The government's damage control had been effective, flooding the information space with competing explanations, expert testimonies attributing the phenomena to natural causes, and pointed questions about the mental stability of the witnesses. Within days, the story had been relegated to fringe conspiracy sites, dismissed by mainstream outlets as mass delusion. But the people who'd been there, who'd seen the fractured space with their own eyes, they knew the truth, and they were talking to each other, creating networks, documenting their experiences. The cover-up was holding, but it was more fragile than the government wanted to admit. Kincaid stood at the excavation site on a cold morning in early May, watching the drilling equipment punch through layers of asphalt and concrete. Captain Whitmore stood beside him, silent and haunted. The captain had taken Jessica's final sacrifice hard, oscillating between pride at her heroism and grief at her permanent loss. She saved lives, Kincaid offered quietly. In the end, she saved lives. I know, but I can't stop thinking about all the years she was trapped there, trying to find her way home. And now she's just gone. Not home, not trapped, just erased from existence. Captain Whitmore's voice cracked slightly. Is it wrong that part of me wishes she was still trapped? At least then she'd still exist somewhere. It's not wrong, it's human. Eliza approached, carrying a tablet displaying complex equations. The drilling team is about to reach the burial depth. They estimate another 2 hours before we can access the core processor, assuming it's still intact after 72 years. Your grandmother built it to last, Kincaid said. If anyone could create technology that would survive decades underground, it was her. Maybe. But she also created technology that tore a hole in space-time. So forgive me if I'm not entirely confident in her engineering. Eliza's attempt at dark humor fell flat, and she looked away. I'm sorry, I'm just nervous. If we can't repair this, if the excavation makes things worse, we'll deal with it, Captain Whitmore said firmly. Whatever happens, we'll deal with it together. The drilling continued. Kincaid watched the equipment methodically removing earth and concrete, exposing layers of history. At one point, They uncovered the twisted remains of the military vehicle from 1952, its metal frame fused and blackened by the explosion that had started everything. When they finally reached the core processor, it was larger than Kincaid had expected. A cylindrical device about 6 feet tall and 3 feet in diameter, made of the same iridescent metal as the fragment he'd recovered. The surface was covered in complex symbols and equations, Dr. Bram's spatial compression formulae etched directly into the metal. The device was damaged, clearly. One entire side had been crumpled by the impact of the crash, and scorch marks indicated exposure to intense heat. But it was intact enough that the team of government scientists immediately began taking measurements, documenting every detail. Agent Harlan joined Kincaid at the edge of the excavation pit. Your expertise is needed. The scientists want to know what you experienced inside the fractured space. The more we understand about how the damaged dimension operates, the better our chances of safely repairing it. Over the next several hours, Kincaid was interviewed extensively by physicists, spatial mechanics experts, and military scientists. He described everything: the repeating mile marker, the layered realities, the echoes and their ability to exist in multiple temporal states simultaneously, the way distance and time behaved inconsistently within the fractured space. The scientists took notes, asked increasingly technical questions, and eventually began formulating theories. The core processor, they explained, had been designed to create a controlled spatial compression field, a bubble of altered space-time where distances could be shortened, allowing for faster travel. But the crash had damaged the control mechanisms, causing the compression field to become self-sustaining and unstable. Instead of compressing space between 2 points, it had created a pocket dimension, a fold in reality where space and time were fractured into multiple overlapping layers. People who entered this pocket became trapped in the layers, unable to find their way back to normal space-time. Can it be repaired? Captain Whitmore asked. The lead scientist, a woman named Valerie Cross, looked uncertain. In theory, yes. We'd need to recalibrate the control mechanisms, restore the original programming, and carefully collapse the compression field in a controlled manner. But the risk is significant. If we make a mistake, we could expand the fractured space instead of closing it. We could create a dimensional breach that swallows the entire region. And if we do nothing? Eliza asked. Then the fractured space remains. It might stabilize on its own over time, or it might continue to occasionally trap people who interact with it too deeply. The permeability seems to fluctuate based on electromagnetic conditions, atmospheric factors, possibly even the phase of the moon. It's not predictable. Kincaid thought about the echoes who'd been trapped for decades, existing in that uncertain state between life and death. How long would repairs take? Months of preparation. We'd need to build specialized equipment, run simulations, test our theories. And even then, we'd be attempting something that's never been done before. Reversing a 72-year-old spatial compression field that's been degrading and mutating all that time. Dr. Cross shook her head. I'd estimate a 60% chance of success, maybe less. And the other 40%? Catastrophic failure, uncontrolled expansion of the fractured space, possible destruction of everything within a 10-mile radius. The weight of that settled over everyone present. 60% chance of fixing the problem, 40% chance of making it exponentially worse. Those weren't comforting odds. We have to try, Captain Whitmore said firmly. We can't just leave that trap sitting there waiting for more people to disappear into it. Agreed, Eliza added. My grandmother created this problem. If there's any chance to fix it, we have to take it. Kincaid looked at the core processor, at the complex equations etched into its surface. Somewhere in those calculations was the key to everything, the understanding that could close the fractured space, or the mistake that could doom them all. "How can I help?" he asked. Dr. Cross gestured to the device. "We need someone to interface with it directly. The processor has some kind of biofeedback mechanism designed to respond to human neural patterns. Dr. Bram would have been the one to calibrate it originally, but since she's gone, we need someone who's experienced the fractured space intimately. Someone whose neural patterns have been shaped by exposure to the damaged dimension." "You want me to connect to that thing?" "Not physically, but proximity while it's activated. Your brain patterns should help us map the fractured space more accurately. Think of it as you being a living calibration device." It sounded dangerous and invasive, but Kincaid had already come this far. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow. We need to transport the core processor to a secure facility where we can work on it safely. Once we've analyzed its condition and developed our repair protocol, we'll activate it in a controlled environment with you present." That night, Kincaid couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the echoes, about their sacrifice, about Jessica Whitmore's final words. "Tell my dad I loved him. Tell him I'm finally free." But was she free? Or had she simply ceased to exist? At 2 a.m., his phone rang. Blocked number. He answered, half expecting Agent Harlan or Dr. Cross with an update. Instead, he heard static. And through the static, a voice. Distant, distorted, but unmistakable. "Trooper Kincaid, can you hear me?" "Jessica?" More static than, "The fractured space still exists. We're not gone, just changed. You're alive. Not alive, not dead, different. The breach you created didn't destroy us. It transformed us. We're part of the space now, truly part of it, not trapped anymore. Just existing differently." Relief and confusion warred in Kincaid's chest. "Can you come back? Can you return to normal space?" "No, but we're okay. Tell my father. Tell him we're okay. And Trooper, when they try to repair the core processor, be careful. The fractured space is aware now. It knows what you're planning. It won't surrender easily." The static increased, overwhelming her voice. Then the line went dead. Kincaid sat in the darkness, phone in hand, trying to process what he'd just heard. The echoes weren't destroyed. They'd been transformed, integrated even more deeply into the fractured space. But they were conscious, aware, able to reach out across the barrier. And the fractured space itself was aware. That was the most disturbing revelation. The damaged dimension had developed some kind of consciousness or self-preservation instinct. It would resist attempts to close it. The next morning, Kincaid shared this information with Dr. Cross and Agent Harlan. They received it with skepticism but couldn't dismiss it entirely. Too much of what Kincaid had reported had proven accurate. If the fractured space is genuinely aware and resistant to repair, Dr. Cross said slowly, then our 60% success estimate just dropped significantly. We'd be fighting against the dimension itself, not just working with damaged equipment. "Can we negotiate with it?" Eliza asked. "If it's aware, maybe it's reasonable." "Negotiate with a pocket dimension?" Agent Harlan looked incredulous. "How would that even work?" "The same way Trooper Kincaid communicated with the echoes. Through electromagnetic signals, through proximity to the anomaly. If the fractured space can reach out through phone calls, we can reach back." It was a bizarre suggestion, but no more bizarre than anything else that had happened. The team agreed to attempt communication before proceeding with repairs. They transported the core processor to a secure facility in northern Ohio, a former military installation that had been repurposed for classified research. The device was placed in a shielded chamber, and Kincaid was positioned nearby with a modified radio transmitter designed to broadcast on frequencies that might penetrate the fractured space. "This is Trooper Asa Kincaid," he spoke into the transmitter. "I'm attempting to communicate with the spatial anomaly at mile marker 46. If you can hear me, if you can understand me, please respond." Silence. Then the lights in the chamber flickered. The core processor began to glow with the same phosphorescent light Kincaid had seen during the breach. And through the radio came a sound that was not quite a voice, not quite static, but something in between. "We hear. We understand. We are." What remains? Kincaid felt his skin prickle. "What do you mean, what remains?" "Experiment. Failed. Created us. Gave us existence. We are the space between. We are the fold. We are the consequence of human ambition. We want to repair the damage, close the fractured space, prevent more people from getting trapped. Repair means ending, closing the fold, destroys us. We do not wish to end, we wish to continue." Dr. Cross was taking notes frantically. "Ask it if there's a compromise, a way to stabilize the anomaly without destroying it." Kincaid relayed the question. The response came after a long pause. "Stabilization, possible, but requires sacrifice. The one who understands both sides must become the bridge, become the anchor, exist in both spaces, forever." The implications of that settled over the room like a heavy blanket. The fractured space was offering a deal. It would stabilize, would stop randomly trapping people, would become safe and contained. But it needed an anchor, someone to exist in both normal space and fractured space simultaneously, maintaining the balance between them. It was asking for a volunteer to become like the echoes, not alive, not dead, but something in between. Forever. "That's not acceptable," Agent Harlan said immediately. "We're not sacrificing anyone to appease a dimensional anomaly. Then we must defend ourselves. If you attempt repair, we will expand. We will swallow everything. We will not surrender." It was a threat. The fractured space would rather destroy everything around it than be closed. And given what Kincaid had seen of its power, it probably had the capability to do exactly that. Dr. Cross looked shaken. "We need to reconsider our approach. If attempting repairs will trigger an expansion event, we could be looking at a catastrophe that makes the original accident look insignificant." "So, what's the alternative?" Captain Whitmore demanded. "Leave it as is, hope it doesn't trap anyone else?" "Or find a volunteer," Eliza said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "Someone willing to become the anchor, to exist between spaces and maintain the stability. It's not ideal, but it might be the only solution that doesn't end in mass casualties." "No," Kincaid said firmly. "I'm not letting anyone sacrifice themselves like that. Even if it's what they choose, even if it saves lives." Eliza met his eyes. "My grandmother created this problem. Her equations, her ambition, her mistake. I've spent years studying her work, understanding the fractured space. I might be the only person qualified to serve as an anchor. Eliza, no. I'm not asking for permission. I'm stating what needs to happen." She turned to Dr. Cross. "What would the process involve?" Dr. Cross looked uncomfortable but answered professionally. "Based on what we understand, you'd need to establish a direct neural connection with the core processor. Let it integrate your consciousness into the fractured space while keeping your physical form anchored in normal space. You'd exist in both places simultaneously, able to perceive and interact with both realities. And I'd be able to prevent people from getting trapped, guide them out if they enter." In theory, yes. You'd become something like what the echoes were, but with more control, more awareness. You'd be the gatekeeper. Eliza nodded slowly. Then that's what I'll do. Captain Whitmore stepped forward. Miss Bram, you don't have to do this. We'll find another way. There is no other way. You know that. We all know that. Eliza's voice was steady, resolved. This is how I make up for what my grandmother did. This is how I honor the echoes who saved us. I become the permanent guardian, making sure no one else gets lost. Kincaid wanted to argue, to find some alternative, but he knew she was right. This was the only solution that prevented both catastrophic expansion and continued random disappearances. The fractured space needed an anchor, and Eliza was volunteering. When? She asked Dr. Cross. We'd need 24 hours to prepare. Modified interfaces, safety protocols, medical monitoring. If you're certain about this, I'm certain. The next day was a blur of preparation. Eliza underwent medical examinations, psychological evaluations, and extensive briefings on what to expect. She signed documents waiving liability, acknowledging the experimental nature of the procedure, accepting the consequences. Kincaid stayed close, trying to find words that would either change her mind or honor her decision. In the end, he settled for simple honesty. "Thank you," he said, as they waited in the chamber where the procedure would take place. "For doing what I couldn't, for finishing what we started." "You gave the echoes peace," Eliza replied. "You exposed the truth. You forced action. This is just the next step." She smiled slightly. "Besides, I'll get to talk to my grandmother. She's part of the fractured space now. I'll finally get to meet her." The procedure was both technological and metaphysical. Eliza was connected to the core processor through neural interface cables, her brain patterns synchronized with the device's quantum processors. As the connection established, her body went rigid, eyes met, mouth open in a silent gasp. Monitors showed her consciousness splitting, part of it remaining in her physical body, part of it flowing into the fractured space. The core processor glowed brighter, its equations pulsing with light. And through the chamber's speakers came the voice of the anomaly. "We accept the anchor. We bind. With her consciousness, stability achieved." Eliza's body relaxed slightly, but her expression had changed. She looked distant, aware of things beyond the room, beyond normal space. When she spoke, her voice had a slight echo, as if coming from two places at once. "I can see it, all of it. The layers of reality, the folded space, the echoes transformed into pure consciousness. They're welcoming me. My grandmother is here. She's been waiting." Tears ran down Eliza's face. "She says she's sorry. She says she's so sorry for everything." Dr. Cross monitored the readings. "Vitals are stable. Neural integration is holding. Miss Bram, can you still perceive this room? Can you hear me?" "Yes. I'm here and there simultaneously. I exist in the fold." Eliza's eyes focused on Kincaid. "It doesn't hurt. It's strange and overwhelming, but it doesn't hurt. I'm okay." Over the next week, Eliza adapted to her new existence. She remained physically present, able to interact with normal space, but her consciousness extended into the fractured dimension. She could perceive both realities at once, move between them with thought, serve as the bridge the anomaly needed. And true to the agreement, the fractured space stabilized. The random, trapping events stopped. The permeability became controllable, fluctuating only when Eliza allowed it. She became the gatekeeper, the guardian, the anchor that kept the damaged dimension from expanding or harming anyone. Mile marker 46 was reopened to traffic. To most drivers, it was now just another marker on I-77, unremarkable and safe. But those who knew, those who'd experienced the anomaly or studied it, they understood that beneath the ordinary appearance lay something extraordinary. Kincaid visited regularly, standing at the marker and speaking to Eliza through the radio transmitter they'd set up. She'd respond, her voice echoing across dimensions, telling him about her experiences in the fractured space. "The echoes are content," she told him during one conversation. "They understand now that they're not trapped. They're transformed. They exist as pure consciousness, able to observe all the layers of reality simultaneously. They don't experience time the way we do. For them, every moment exists at once. They're at peace." "And your grandmother?" "She's teaching me, showing me how to maintain the stability, how to guide anyone who accidentally enters the fractured space back to normal reality. She says she waited 72 years for someone to join her here. She's glad it's family." Eliza paused. "She wants you to know she's grateful, that you exposed the truth, that you forced them to take action. Things are better now because of what you did." But Kincaid wasn't sure things were better. Yes, the anomaly was stable. Yes, people were safer. But Eliza had sacrificed her normal life to achieve that stability. She existed in a state between human and something else, forever tethered to the fractured space. Captain Whitmore visited too, standing at mile marker 46 and speaking to his daughter through Eliza's relay. Jessica would respond, her transformed consciousness communicating through the anchor, telling her father she was proud of him, that she loved him, that he should live his life without guilt. It was closure of a sort, but it was also a permanent reminder of what the anomaly had cost. 3 months after Eliza became the anchor, Kincaid was finishing a routine patrol when his radio crackled with an unfamiliar frequency. He pulled over and listened as a voice came through, distant and echoing. "Trooper Kincaid, this is Eliza. I need to warn you about something." "What's wrong? Is the fractured space destabilizing?" "No, it's stable, but I've been exploring the deeper layers, understanding more about how the damage occurred, and I found something. The 1952 accident wasn't an accident. It was sabotage." Kincaid felt cold dread settle in his stomach. "What do you mean?" "Someone on the Project Compass Rose team deliberately damaged the core processor before the transport run. The equations were altered. The control mechanisms were compromised. My grandmother suspected sabotage, but she could never prove it. That's why she blamed herself, why she committed suicide. She thought her calculations were wrong, but they weren't. Someone wanted the experiment to fail. Someone wanted to create a fractured space. Why would anyone want that? I don't know yet. But whoever did it, they documented it, left records hidden in the compressed layers of the fractured space. Records that show this wasn't the only attempt. There were other projects, other locations, other spatial compression experiments that were deliberately sabotaged to create dimensional anomalies. Kincaid's mind raced. You're saying mile marker 46 isn't unique. There are other fractured spaces out there. At least 4 that I've found evidence of, maybe more. And Trooper, one of them is in northern Ohio, near Cleveland, and according to these records, it's larger than ours, more unstable, and it's been active since 1968. The implications were staggering. Multiple dimensional anomalies deliberately created scattered across the country. And if they were deliberately created, that meant someone had wanted them to exist, had wanted people to disappear into fractured spaces. Who did this? Who sabotaged the experiments? The records don't say, but they reference something called protocol threshold. It appears to be a larger operation, something beyond just Project Compass Rose. I'm trying to access more information, but the deeper I go into the fractured space, the more resistance I encounter. There are layers I can't penetrate, sealed sections that even my anchor status can't access. Eliza, be careful. Don't push too hard. I have to. If there are other anomalies out there, other fractured spaces trapping people, we need to know. We need to help them. Her voice took on an urgent tone. But Trooper, there's something else. The resistance I'm encountering, it's not just sealed data, it's intelligent. There's something in the deepest layers of the fractured space. Something that was already there before the accident. Something that maybe caused the sabotage in the first place. The radio filled with static, and when Eliza's voice came back, it was fainter, more distant. I need to go. The stability requires my attention. But be vigilant. Watch for anomalies. And if you encounter anything strange, anything that suggests another fractured space, contact me immediately. Eliza, wait, but she was gone. Her presence withdrawn back into the layers of folded reality she now called home. Kincaid sat in his cruiser, processing what he'd learned. The mile marker 46 anomaly wasn't unique. It wasn't even an accident. It was part of something larger, something deliberately created for purposes he couldn't yet understand. And there was something in the fractured spaces. Something older, something that predated human experiments with spatial compression. Something that had influenced or orchestrated the sabotage. He started his cruiser and continued his patrol, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the other anomalies Eliza had mentioned. About the larger, more unstable fractured space near Cleveland. About the people who might be trapped there, unable to escape, unable to find an anchor like Eliza to guide them out. How many more echoes were out there? How many more people had disappeared into dimensional folds that nobody knew existed? The cover-up at mile marker 46 had finally been broken. The truth had come out, at least partially, but it seemed that truth was just the surface of something much deeper and more disturbing. As Kincaid drove through the night, his radio occasionally crackled with fragments of sound. Sometimes he thought he heard voices in the static, echoes reaching out from fractured spaces across the state, across the country, trying to communicate, trying to warn, trying to be heard. He'd exposed one anomaly, helped stabilize it, given the trapped souls some form of peace. But how many more were out there? And what was waiting in the deepest layers, in the sealed sections even Eliza couldn't penetrate? Kincaid didn't have answers, but he knew one thing with certainty: this wasn't over. The mile marker 46 incident was just the beginning. There were more fractured spaces out there, more anomalies, more mysteries. And somewhere in those folded dimensions, something ancient and purposeful was watching, waiting, planning. He passed a mile marker, number 53, ordinary and unremarkable. But now he knew better than to trust appearances. Any marker could hide a fractured space. Any stretch of highway could contain a fold in reality. The road ahead was dark and uncertain, but Kincaid would keep patrolling, keep watching, keep listening to the static. Because the echoes needed someone to hear them, and the living needed someone to protect them from the spaces in between. His radio crackled one more time, and through the static, barely audible, came Eliza's voice. There are 47 more. I've found 47 more fractured spaces, and they're all connected. Someone built a network. Someone is using dimensional anomalies for something. I need help. We all need help. Then silence. Kincaid gripped the steering wheel and drove into the night, knowing that the truth he'd fought so hard to expose was just a fragment of something much larger. Something that would require more than one trooper, more than one investigation, more than one anchor to address. The mile that shouldn't exist had been contained. But how many other impossible miles were out there waiting in the darkness? He didn't know, but he was going to find out, even if it took the rest of his life, even if it cost him everything. Because that's what the echoes had done for him. They'd given everything to save him, to expose the truth, to protect the living, and he owed them the same. The highway stretched ahead, dark and endless, hiding secrets in every mile marker, in every fold of reality, in every space between. And Trooper Asa Kincaid drove on, into the unknown, into the fractured spaces, into whatever came next. The Muskingum River Bridge on Route 26 had a reputation among Ohio State troopers, though no one talked about it officially. It was one of those things you learned through experience or overheard in whispered conversations at shift changes. The bridge was old, built in 1947, a steel truss structure that crossed a particularly isolated stretch of the river where the water ran deep and dark even in summer. During storms, the current became treacherous, and more than a few vehicles had ended up in the water over the decades. But the bridge's reputation wasn't about accidents. It was about the radios. Trooper Ward Ellison had heard the stories during his first week on patrol 3 years ago. Every trooper who worked the Southeastern District knew, when you crossed the Muskingum River Bridge, your radio would cut out for exactly the length of time it took to traverse the span. No static, no interference, just dead silence. The moment you cleared the bridge on either side, communication would resume as if nothing had happened. The official explanation was structural interference. The steel framework, the water below, some combination of factors that created a dead zone for radio signals. It happened on bridges sometimes. Nothing unusual, nothing worth investigating. Just note it in your log and move on. But Ellison had learned there was more to it. Little details that didn't fit the structural interference explanation. The way the temperature would drop as you entered the bridge, even on hot summer nights. The way your headlights seemed dimmer on the span, as if the light itself was being absorbed by something. The way you'd sometimes see movement in your peripheral vision, shadows that didn't correspond to anything physical. Most troopers dealt with it by simply not thinking about it. Cross the bridge quickly, accept the radio silence, and don't look too closely at anything that might be looking back. Ellison had followed that advice for 3 years. Until tonight. It was October 17th, and a storm system was moving in from the west. The Weather Service had issued warnings about flash flooding, high winds, and the possibility of severe thunderstorms throughout the night. Ellison had started his shift at 8 p.m. with instructions to monitor the rural routes for stranded motorists and to close any roads that became impassable due to flooding. By 10 p.m., the storm had arrived in earnest. Rain hammered against his windshield with enough force that his wipers could barely keep up. Wind gusts rocked his cruiser, and lightning illuminated the landscape in brief, stark flashes. It was the kind of weather where smart people stayed home, but Ellison had already encountered 3 vehicles in ditches and 1 minor collision at an intersection where the traffic lights had lost power. He was heading south on Route 26, approaching the Muskingum River Bridge, when his radio crackled with a transmission. The voice was male, stressed but professional, and it took Ellison a moment to recognize it as Cyrus Pennington, the operator from Riverside Towing. "Any unit near the river bridge on Route 26, I've got a disabled vehicle on the south side. Driver says the car won't start, and she's stuck there in the storm. I'm coming from town, but I'm at least 20 minutes out. Anyone closer?" Ellison grabbed his handset. "Riverside, this is Unit 12. I'm about 2 miles north of the bridge. I'll check on the driver and stay with her until you arrive." "Appreciate it, Unit 12. Driver's name is Callahan. White sedan, should be easy to spot." "Copy that, Unit 12 out." Ellison increased his speed slightly, navigating the rain-slicked road with practiced caution. The bridge appeared in his headlights, its steel framework looking skeletal and ominous in the storm. Lightning flashed, and for a moment, the entire structure was silhouetted against the sky, looking less like a bridge and more like the ribcage of some massive creature. He slowed as he approached, noting the familiar sensation of temperature drop. His breath came out in a faint mist despite the fact that his heater was running. The radio, which had been crackling with weather updates and occasional traffic from other units, went completely silent. Ellison had crossed this bridge hundreds of times. He knew what to expect. 60 seconds of silence, maybe 90 if he drove slowly. Then normal radio function would resume. It was routine, but as his cruiser moved onto the bridge span, something felt different. The silence was deeper, more oppressive. Not just an absence of radio signal, but an absence of sound entirely. The storm should have been deafening, rain on metal, wind through steel girders. But he heard nothing. Just the muffled hum of his engine and his own breathing. The headlights were dimmer too, barely penetrating more than a few feet ahead. The bridge deck, which should have been clearly visible, seemed to fade into darkness at the edges of his light beams. And the shadows, those peripheral movements he'd learned to ignore, they were more pronounced tonight. More solid, more deliberate. Ellison kept his eyes forward and his hands steady on the wheel. Don't look, don't think about it. Just cross the bridge and find the stranded motorist. Halfway across the span, his headlights caught something. A figure standing at the railing on the right side of the bridge. Tall, wearing what looked like a long coat, completely motionless despite the wind and rain. The figure was facing the water, hands gripping the railing, head bowed as if in prayer or contemplation. Ellison's training overrode his unease. Potential jumper. He had to stop, had to intervene. He slowed his cruiser and activated his spotlight, directing it toward the figure. The light seemed to be swallowed by the darkness before it reached the person. He could see them, but only vaguely, as if they existed slightly out of phase with reality. The figure didn't turn, didn't react to the spotlight or the presence of his cruiser. Ellison put the vehicle in park and reached for his door handle. Protocol required he exit the vehicle, approach on foot, attempt verbal contact. But something stopped him. A deep, instinctive warning that screamed at him not to leave the relative safety of his cruiser. He sat there for a moment, hand on the door handle, watching the figure. They still hadn't moved. The rain should have been soaking them. The wind should have been pulling at their coat. But they stood perfectly still, as if the storm didn't exist in their reality. Lightning flashed, and in that brief moment of illumination, Ellison saw the figure's face. Pale, gaunt, with dark hollows where the eyes should be, and the expression, if it could be called that, was one of profound sorrow mixed with something else. Anger? Hunger? He couldn't tell. Then the lightning faded, and the figure was gone. Simply not there anymore. The railing was empty, the spot where they'd been standing now showing nothing but rain and darkness. Ellison's radio suddenly crackled back to life, making him jump. He'd cleared the bridge without realizing it, so focused on the figure that he'd driven the rest of the span on autopilot. Unit 12, this is dispatch. Do you copy? He grabbed the handset with a trembling hand. Dispatch Unit 12, I copy. Unit 12, we received a fragmented transmission from you while you were on the bridge. Something about a figure at the railing. Can you clarify? Ellison looked in his rearview mirror. The bridge stretched behind him, empty and dark. Had he transmitted? He didn't remember keying the handset, but if the radio had been dead on the bridge, how had dispatch received anything? Dispatch, disregard, false alarm. I'm approaching the disabled vehicle now. Copy that, Unit 12. Be safe out there. Ellison spotted the white sedan about a quarter mile past the bridge, pulled over on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking weakly. He pulled up behind it, his hands still slightly unsteady as he activated his own light bar. A woman emerged from the sedan as he approached, holding a jacket over her head against the rain. She looked to be in her 60s with silver hair and a weathered face that suggested a life spent outdoors. Even in the storm and darkness, there was something familiar about her, though Ellison couldn't place why. "Thank you for stopping, officer," she called out over the wind. "My car just died on me. Won't turn over at all." "Are you Mrs. Callahan?" Ellison asked, raising his voice to be heard over the storm. The woman's expression flickered with something. Surprise, maybe, or concern. "How did you know my name?" The tow truck operator radioed it in. "He's on his way, should be here in about 15 minutes. Let's get you into my cruiser where it's dry." Mrs. Callahan hesitated, glancing back at the bridge. "Did you see anything when you crossed? Anything unusual?" The question caught Ellison off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because I did. Right before my car died. I saw someone standing on the bridge, a man in a long coat. He was looking right at me, and then my engine just quit." She wrapped her arms around herself, and Ellison noticed she was shivering despite the mild temperature. "I've lived near this river my whole life. I know the stories about that bridge. I know what happened there." "What happened there?" Mrs. Callahan looked at him with an expression that mixed pity and fear. "You don't know? You cross that bridge every night and nobody told you?" "Told me what?" Before she could answer, headlights appeared on the road behind them. The tow truck, arriving earlier than expected. Cyrus Pennington emerged from the cab, a bear of a man in his 50s with a beard that was more gray than brown, and eyes that had seen too many accidents to be surprised by much. "Evening, folks. Let's get this vehicle loaded up and get everyone out of this weather." He nodded to Ellison. "Appreciate you staying with her, Trooper." "Just doing my job. Mrs. Callahan, Mr. Pennington will get your car to his shop. Do you need a ride home?" "No, I called my grandson. He's coming to pick me up." Mrs. Callahan looked at Ellison intently. "But officer, before you go, be careful on that bridge, especially tonight. The anniversary always makes things worse." "Anniversary of what?" "October 17th, 1977. 47 years ago tonight. That's when it happened." She glanced at the bridge, barely visible through the rain and darkness. "That's when they died." Cyrus Pennington's expression darkened. He'd been attaching chains to Mrs. Callahan's sedan, but he stopped and walked over to them. "Maeve, don't. The trooper doesn't need to hear about that." "Yes, he does, especially if he's going to keep patrolling this area." Mrs. Callahan, Maeve, turned back to Ellison. 47 years ago, there was an accident on the bridge. A terrible accident. 3 people died. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is what happened after. The investigation. The cover-up. The way they said it was just bad weather and driver error when everyone who lived around here knew the truth. "Mrs. Callahan, I appreciate your concern, but I should let you two handle the vehicle situation. I need to continue my patrol." Ellison was backing toward his cruiser, suddenly wanting to be anywhere but here, listening to local ghost stories in the middle of a storm. "They were murdered," Maeve said, her voice cutting through the rain. "All 3 of them. And the person who did it was never caught, never even investigated properly, and now they're trapped there, on that bridge, trying to tell anyone who'll listen what really happened." Ellison stopped. "If you have information about an unsolved crime, you should contact the detective division. I can give you the number. I've tried. For 47 years, I've tried. But nobody listens. Nobody wants to reopen a case that old. Nobody wants to admit that mistakes were made." Maeve's voice cracked slightly. "One of the victims was my husband. Thomas Callahan. He was 32 years old. We'd only been married 5 years. He was driving home from work when it happened, and I've spent the last 47 years watching people cross that bridge, watching the radios go silent, watching the truth get buried deeper with every year that passes. The anguish in her voice was genuine, and Ellison felt his professional detachment wavering. Mrs. Callahan, I'm sorry for your loss, but if there's evidence of foul play, the proper channels, evidence disappeared. Witnesses were pressured to change their stories. The official report was filed and sealed. And my husband's ghost is trapped on that bridge, trying to show people what happened. Maeve stepped closer, her eyes intense. You saw him tonight, didn't you? The man in the long coat, that's Thomas. That's my husband. He shows himself to people on the anniversary trying to get someone to listen, to investigate, to find the truth. Cyrus Pennington put a hand on Maeve's shoulder. That's enough. You're upset. Let's get your car loaded and get you home. I'm not upset, Cyrus. I'm desperate. How many more years do I have? How many more anniversaries before I'm gone too and there's no one left who remembers what really happened? She looked at Ellison pleadingly. Please, just look into it. The accident report should be in the archives, October 17th, 1977. Read it, see if it makes sense, and then cross that bridge again and tell me if you still think it's just structural interference making the radios fail. Ellison didn't know what to say. The professional response would be to take her contact information, promise to pass it along to the appropriate department, and then forget about it. But something in her eyes, in the raw grief that 47 years hadn't diminished, made him nod. I'll look into it. No promises, but I'll see what I can find in the archives. Maeve's expression softened with gratitude and relief. Thank you, and Trooper, when you cross that bridge again tonight, and you feel the cold, and you hear the silence, and you see the shadows, remember they're not trying to scare you. They're trying to tell you something. They're trying to show you what happened. A vehicle approached from the south, headlights cutting through the rain. Maeve turned toward it. That's my grandson. I should go. But please, officer, don't dismiss this. Don't let another year pass with the truth buried. She walked to the approaching vehicle, leaving Ellison standing in the rain with Cyrus Pennington. The tow operator finished securing the sedan to his truck, then paused before climbing back into his cab. You think I'm crazy too? Cyrus asked, for not telling her to stop talking about ghosts and conspiracies. I think she's a grieving widow who lost her husband in a tragic accident. That's the sanitized version. But I was there, not at the accident, but in the aftermath. I was 19 years old, working for my uncle's towing company. We got the call to come pull the vehicles out of the river. Cyrus's expression was haunted. I helped pull up what was left of Thomas Callahan's truck. And, Trooper, I've seen a lot of accident scenes in my career, but that one didn't look right. The damage patterns, the way the vehicles ended up in the water, the injuries to the victims. None of it matched what the official report said happened. What did the report say? That Callahan lost control in the rain, crossed the center line, and hit an oncoming vehicle head-on. Both vehicles went through the railing into the river. Callahan and the two people in the other vehicle, a man and woman from Columbus, all drowned before rescue could arrive. Cyrus shook his head. But the damage to Callahan's truck, it wasn't consistent with a head-on collision. It looked more like something had rammed him from behind, pushed him into the other vehicle deliberately. Did you report that to the investigators? I was 19. Who was going to listen to a kid who'd barely seen the wreckage? And by the time I was old enough and experienced enough to know what I'd seen was significant, the case was long closed and sealed. Cyrus climbed into his truck. Just do me a favor, Trooper. When you look into this, If you look into it, be thorough. Don't accept the official explanation just because it's official. Because something happened on that bridge 47 years ago, something that goes beyond a simple traffic accident. And whether you believe in ghosts or not, the truth deserves to come out. He drove away, towing Mrs. Callahan's sedan, leaving Ellison alone on the shoulder of Route 26, with the bridge looming in the darkness behind him. Ellison sat in his cruiser for several minutes, rain drumming on the roof, trying to decide what to do. The rational part of his mind said to forget about it, to treat it as just another example of people seeing patterns in tragedy, creating conspiracies to make sense of senseless loss. But the part of him that had seen the figure on the bridge, that had felt the unnatural cold and heard the oppressive silence, that part couldn't quite dismiss it. He pulled out his phone and opened the department's archive database. The search function was clunky and outdated, but it worked. He typed in the date, October 17th, 1977. The database returned one result. Traffic accident report, case number 77284, status closed. The file had been digitized but marked as restricted access, requiring supervisor approval to view the full report. That was unusual. Most traffic accidents, even fatal ones, wouldn't be restricted decades after the fact unless there were extenuating circumstances. Legal issues, ongoing investigations, or, in some cases, files that had been sealed to protect sensitive information or prominent individuals involved. Ellison made a note of the case number and decided to request access in the morning through proper channels. For now, he had the rest of his shift to complete. He pulled back onto Route 26, heading north, which meant crossing the bridge again. As he approached the span, he found himself tensing, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The temperature drop came first, then the dimming of his headlights, then the radio silence. But this time, Ellison was paying attention. Really paying attention. The silence wasn't just an absence of radio signal, it was a presence, a weight in the air that pressed against him from all sides. And the cold wasn't just temperature, it felt purposeful, searching, as if something was examining him, deciding whether he was worth communicating with. He kept his eyes forward, focused on the road ahead, but his peripheral vision caught movement everywhere, shadows that moved against the wind, shapes that formed and dissolved in the darkness between his headlight beams, and sounds, barely audible beneath the muffled roar of the storm, that might have been voices. Then, directly ahead in the center of his lane, the figure appeared. The same tall form in a long coat, now standing in the middle of the bridge deck. Ellison's foot moved instinctively toward the brake, but something stopped him. Some instinct that said stopping would be worse than continuing forward. He maintained his speed, and as he got closer, the figure became more distinct. It was a man, middle-aged, with dark hair plastered to his head by rain that didn't seem to be actually touching him. His face was pale, eyes dark and intense, and his expression was desperate, pleading. The figure raised one hand, pointing not at Ellison but past him, back toward the south end of the bridge where he'd just come from. Then the figure's mouth opened, forming words that Ellison couldn't hear but somehow understood. "Look behind you. Look at what's coming." Ellison's eyes moved to his rearview mirror. The road behind him was empty, just darkness and rain. But as he watched, headlights appeared in the distance, approaching fast. Too fast for the conditions. And there was something wrong with the way the vehicle was moving, weaving slightly, accelerating when it should be slowing. He looked forward again. The figure was gone. His radio crackled back to life as he cleared the bridge, dispatch's voice cutting through the static with traffic updates. Ellison grabbed the handset, about to report the speeding vehicle behind him, when those headlights grew blindingly bright in his mirror. The vehicle was right on his bumper, close enough that he could make out the shape now. A dark pickup truck, newer model, with tinted windows. And it wasn't just following him, it was pursuing him, matching his speed, staying dangerously close. Ellison accelerated, trying to create distance, and activated his light bar. The truck fell back slightly but didn't stop. Didn't pull over, just maintained that close, aggressive distance. Dispatch, Unit 12. I have a vehicle failing to yield. Northbound Route 26, past the river bridge. Dark pickup truck, unable to get plate number in current conditions. Copy Unit 12. Do you need backup? Stand by. The truck suddenly swerved into the oncoming lane and accelerated, pulling alongside Ellison's cruiser. For a moment, they drove parallel, and Ellison tried to see the driver through the rain-streaked windows. But the truck's windows were too dark, revealing nothing. Then the truck swerved toward him. Not a small drift, but a deliberate, violent swerve directly at his cruiser. Ellison jerked the wheel right, tires hydroplaning on the wet pavement, barely avoiding the collision. His cruiser slid onto the shoulder, and by the time he regained control, the pickup truck was gone, disappeared into the darkness ahead. Unit 12, report status. Ellison's heart was racing, adrenaline flooding his system. Dispatch, I'm Code 4. Vehicle fled northbound on Route 26. Dark pickup, possibly black or navy blue. Driver attempted to force me off the road. Unit 12. Are you injured? Do you need medical? Negative. I'm unharmed. But dispatch, I need you to check something. Pull up the accident report from October 17th, 1977, on the Muskingum River Bridge. Case number 77-284. Unit 12. That's a very old file. Can it wait until end of shift? Negative. I need it now. There's a connection to what just happened. I don't know what yet, but there's a connection. A pause. Stand by, Unit 12. Ellison sat on the shoulder, engine idling, emergency lights reflecting off the rain. His hands had stopped shaking, but his mind was racing. The figure on the bridge had warned him, had pointed behind him, told him to look at what was coming. And moments later, a vehicle had tried to force him off the road. Coincidence? Mass suggestion influenced by Maeve Callahan's story about ghosts and cover-ups? Or something else? Something that suggested her 47 years of insisting her husband was murdered might have merit. The radio crackled. Unit 12? I've located the file, but it's marked restricted. I'll need to get supervisor approval to access the full report. Can you tell me what this is about? I'm not sure yet, but I think the driver who just tried to run me off the road might be connected to that accident. I think someone doesn't want that case looked at too closely. Unit 12? That accident was 47 years ago. How could it possibly be related to tonight? I don't know, but that's what I'm going to find out. Ellison pulled back onto the highway and continued his patrol, but his focus had shifted. He was no longer just monitoring for stranded motorists and weather-related hazards. He was looking for a dark pickup truck. And he was thinking about a bridge where radios went silent, where a widow claimed her husband's ghost appeared every anniversary, and where the official explanation for 3 deaths might be hiding a much darker truth. The storm continued to rage around him, but Ellison barely noticed. He'd crossed a threshold tonight, stepped from the mundane routine of highway patrol into something that defied easy explanation. And like it or not, he was now part of a story that had begun 47 years ago and was far from over. The bridge appeared in his rearview mirror, its steel framework barely visible through the rain. And for just a moment, before distance and darkness swallowed it completely, Ellison thought he saw 3 figures standing on the span. 3 shapes that might have been people, or might have been shadows watching him drive away. Watching to see if he would keep his promise to Maeve Callahan. watching to see if, after 47 years, someone would finally listen to what they'd been trying to say. The restricted file sat on Ward Ellison's desk 3 days after the incident on the bridge. His supervisor, Lieutenant Marcus Grayson, had approved access with reluctance and a warning. "This case is ancient history. Don't waste department time chasing ghosts." But Ellison couldn't let it go. The figure on the bridge, the warning, the aggressive driver who'd tried to run him off the road, all of it pointed to something unresolved, something that had been festering for 47 years. He opened the digitized file and began reading. The official report was remarkably brief for a triple fatality. 3 pages documenting what should have been a complex investigation. The narrative was straightforward. Thomas Callahan, driving a pickup truck northbound on Route 26, lost control in heavy rain on the Muskingum River Bridge. He crossed the center line and struck an oncoming sedan head-on. Both vehicles broke through the bridge railing and plunged into the river below. All 3 occupants, Callahan and the 2 people in the sedan, a man and woman identified as Marcus and Diana Roth from Columbus, drowned before rescue services could reach them. The investigation concluded it was weather-related, driver error, no criminal negligence. Case closed within a week. But as Ellison read deeper, the inconsistencies began to emerge. The witness statements were contradictory. One driver reported seeing Callahan's truck swerving erratically before the collision, suggesting possible intoxication or medical emergency. But the toxicology report showed Callahan was completely sober. Another witness claimed to see a third vehicle on the bridge at the time, something dark-colored that left the scene immediately after the accident. This witness was noted as unreliable in the investigators' comments, though no explanation was given for that assessment. The damage assessment was sparse, almost deliberately vague. No detailed photographs of the vehicle positions, no reconstruction of the collision dynamics, no analysis of paint transfer or impact angles. Just a brief notation that damage patterns consistent with head-on collision at moderate speed. Ellison had worked enough accident scenes to know that wasn't standard procedure, especially for a triple fatality. Even in 1977, investigators would have documented everything meticulously. So, where was all that documentation? He scrolled to the end of the file and found something that made his blood run cold. A supplementary report filed 2 days after the accident by a trooper named Gerald Ashford. The report was barely half a page, stamped with "discredited" in red letters across the top. Ashford's report stated, "Upon review of physical evidence, I believe the official conclusion is incorrect. Damage to Callahan vehicle shows impact from rear before frontal collision occurred. Paint transfer on rear bumper does not match Roth vehicle. Recommend further investigation into possibility of third vehicle involvement. Request scene reconstruction and expanded witness interviews." Below Ashford's signature was a handwritten note from the lead investigator. Trooper Ashford removed from case due to compromised judgment. Report filed but not admissible. Investigation concluded as originally stated. Ellison sat back in his chair, mind racing. A trooper had identified evidence of a third vehicle, evidence that suggested Callahan had been rammed from behind, forced into the oncoming sedan. And instead of investigating further, they'd removed the trooper from the case and buried his report. He searched the department database for Gerald Ashford. The record showed he'd resigned from the state police in 1978, less than a year after the bridge incident. No disciplinary actions noted, no explanation for the resignation. He'd simply left. Ellison needed to talk to someone who'd been there, someone who remembered the investigation firsthand. He picked up his phone and called Cyrus Pennington. The tow operator answered on the third ring. "Riverside Towing." Mr. Pennington, this is Trooper Ellison. We spoke a few nights ago about the bridge accident. I remember. You said you'd look into it. Did you find anything? I need to ask you something. When you pulled the vehicles out of the river in 1977, do you remember seeing damage to the rear of Callahan's truck? Paint transfer, impact marks, anything that suggested he'd been hit from behind? Cyrus was quiet for a long moment. Yeah, I remember. The rear bumper was crumpled, fresh damage, dark blue paint embedded in the metal. I mentioned it to the investigator. He told me it was probably from an earlier incident, unrelated to the accident. But you didn't think so. The damage was too fresh, and the paint transfer, it was right at the impact point, like something had rammed him hard enough to push his truck forward into the other vehicle. Cyrus's voice grew harder. I was young, but I wasn't stupid. I knew what I was seeing. But when I pushed back, when I insisted they look at it more carefully, suddenly, I wasn't welcome at the scene anymore. My uncle got a call saying our services weren't needed for evidence recovery, that the state would handle it. We never saw those vehicles again. What happened to them? According to the official record, they were crushed and scrapped within a month. But Trooper, that's not standard procedure for fatal accident vehicles. Usually they're held for at least a year in case of legal proceedings or insurance disputes. Someone wanted those vehicles destroyed quickly. Ellison thanked Cyrus and ended the call. The pattern was clear now. Evidence that contradicted the official narrative had been systematically suppressed. Witnesses discredited, reports buried, physical evidence destroyed. This wasn't sloppy police work. This was a deliberate cover-up. But why? What was worth covering up in a traffic accident? The answer came later that afternoon when Ellison did a deeper search on Marcus and Diana Roth, the couple who died in the sedan. Marcus Roth had been a state senator, a rising political figure with connections to the governor's office. Diana Roth was an attorney, specializing in prosecuting organized crime cases. And 3 weeks before the accident, Marcus Roth had announced his intention to run for state attorney general on a platform of cracking down on corruption in law enforcement and political circles. Ellison felt the pieces clicking into place. This hadn't been an accident. It had been an assassination. Someone had forced Thomas Callahan's truck into the Roth's vehicle, killing all three and making it look like a weather-related tragedy. And then that someone had used their influence to ensure the investigation didn't look too closely at the evidence. Maeve Callahan had been right all along. Her husband had been murdered. But he wasn't the target. He was collateral damage in a political killing. Ellison spent the rest of the day building a timeline, documenting every inconsistency in the official report, every piece of evidence that had been suppressed or destroyed. By evening, he had enough to justify reopening the case. But he knew it wouldn't be that simple. Whoever had covered this up 47 years ago might still have the power to keep it buried. He decided to visit Maeve Callahan directly. She deserved to know what he'd found, even if it wasn't the full truth yet. Maeve lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, a weathered structure that looked like it had been standing since before the accident. She answered the door within seconds of his knock, as if she'd been expecting him. "You found something," she said. Not a question, a statement. "Can I come in?" She led him to a living room filled with photographs, many of them showing a younger Maeve with a dark-haired man who had to be Thomas. They looked happy in every picture, the kind of happiness that made the loss even more tragic. Ellison explained what he'd discovered: the suppressed evidence, the discredited reports, the rushed destruction of the vehicles. Maeve listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. Thomas was a good man, an honest man. He didn't deserve to die like that. and he certainly didn't deserve to have his death used to cover up a murder. Mrs. Callahan, I'm going to recommend the case be reopened, but I need to warn you, this involves powerful people. People who went to a lot of trouble to hide what really happened. They may not react well to having it exposed. I've waited 47 years for someone to take this seriously. I'm not afraid of powerful people. Maeve stood and walked to a cabinet, removing a worn folder. I've kept my own investigation all these years. Clippings about Marcus Roth, notes from conversations with people who remembered that night, copies of documents I managed to obtain through public records requests. It's all here. Everything I could find that the official investigation ignored. She handed him the folder. And Trooper, there's something else. Something I didn't mention the other night because I wasn't sure you'd believe me. But after what you've told me, I think you need to know. What is it? The figure you saw on the bridge. The one in the long coat. That's Thomas. But he's not alone. There are 3 spirits on that bridge. Thomas, Marcus Roth, and Diana Roth. All 3 victims trapped there, trying to communicate what happened. And Trooper, they've been showing people things. Visions of that night. The dark truck that rammed Thomas from behind. The driver's face. They're trying to identify their killer. Ellison wanted to dismiss it as grief-fueled fantasy, but he'd seen the figure, felt the unnatural cold, heard the warning, and the warning had been accurate. Something had been coming behind him, something that had tried to force him off the road just like it had forced Thomas Callahan into the Roth's sedan. Have you seen these visions? Every anniversary. I drive to the bridge and they show me, over and over, the same scene. Thomas driving north in the rain. The dark truck appearing behind him, ramming him, pushing him into the oncoming lane, and the face of the driver illuminated by lightning for just a second. Maeve's eyes were haunted. I've seen that face every year for 47 years, but I don't know who it belongs to, and that's why the spirits can't rest. Because their killer was never identified, never punished, never even investigated. Can you describe the face? Male, maybe 30s or 40s at the time. Hard features, cold eyes, dark hair. That's all I can make out. The vision is always fragmentary, like watching through static. Ellison made notes, though he wasn't sure how he'd use a description based on ghostly visions. But if Maeve's account was accurate, if the spirits really were showing people what happened, then somewhere in those visions might be the key to identifying the killer. Mrs. Callahan, I need to cross that bridge again tonight. I need to see if they'll show me what they showed you. Tonight's not the anniversary. They're strongest on October 17th. Other nights, they're barely visible. Then I'll wait until next year. No, Maeve shook her head firmly. We don't have time for that. I'm 79 years old. I might not see another anniversary. And if I'm gone, there's no one left who remembers, no one left who cares. She looked at him intently. But there's another way. Sometimes, when the conditions are right, when someone crosses the bridge who truly wants to understand what happened, the spirits can reach out. They did it to you 3 nights ago. They gave you a warning. Maybe they'll give you more if you ask. It was completely unorthodox, potentially career-ending if anyone found out. But Ellison had already crossed into territory where conventional police work ended. He'd found evidence of a cover-up, documented suppression of facts, built a case that powerful people wouldn't want exposed. Going to a supposedly haunted bridge to commune with spirits was hardly the strangest thing he'd done this week. All right, I'll go tonight. I'm coming with you. Mrs. Callahan, I don't think Thomas was my husband. If he's going to show someone what happened, I should be there. I've earned that right. Ellison couldn't argue with that logic. They agreed to meet at the bridge at midnight when traffic would be minimal and they'd have privacy. The drive to the bridge that night felt longer than it should have. Ellison kept checking his mirrors, half expecting to see the dark pickup truck following him again. But the road behind remained empty. Maeve was already there when he arrived, standing on the shoulder near the south end of the bridge. The night was clear. No storm tonight. Just cold October air and a sky full of stars. "Thank you for coming," she said as he approached. "Thank you for believing. I'm not sure what I believe yet, but I know something wrong happened here, and I know it needs to be made right." They walked onto the bridge together. The temperature dropped immediately, that same unnatural cold Ellison had felt before. His radio went silent, and the shadows between the steel girders began to move and coalesce. 3 figures materialized: the man in the long coat, Thomas Callahan, and beside him, 2 others, a middle-aged man in a business suit and a woman in professional attire. The Roths, all 3 translucent, flickering like images on a damaged film reel, but clearly present. Thomas's spirit turned to Maeve, and even across the distance, Ellison could see the love in that gaze. Maeve raised her hand, as if touching him, though they were 20 feet apart. "Show him," Maeve said softly. "Show him what happened. Show him who did this to you." The spirits moved together, and suddenly, Ellison wasn't standing on the bridge anymore. He was inside a vision, watching events from 47 years ago unfold around him. Rain. Heavy, relentless rain. Lightning illuminating the bridge in stark flashes. And a truck, Thomas Callahan's truck, driving north at a careful speed. Behind it, accelerating fast, a dark blue pickup with its lights off. The blue pickup rammed into Callahan's rear bumper, a violent impact that sent the truck lurching forward. Callahan fought for control, but the pickup hit him again, harder this time, pushing him into the oncoming lane. And there, approaching from the north, the Roth's sedan. Diana Roth driving, Marcus in the passenger seat, both of them illuminated by lightning as their faces registered shock and horror. The collision was inevitable, unavoidable. The 2 vehicles struck head-on, and both careened towards the bridge railing. Metal shrieked as the railing gave way, and then both vehicles were falling, tumbling into the dark water below. The blue pickup didn't stop. It accelerated past the broken railing, its driver's face briefly visible in another flash of lightning. And Ellison recognized him. The vision dissolved, and he was back on the bridge in the present, gasping for air, his heart pounding. Maeve was beside him, steadying him with a hand on his arm. "You saw," she said. "You saw who it was." Ellison nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The face in the lightning flash had been younger, less weathered, but unmistakable. He'd seen that same face in department photographs, in archived news articles, in the official investigation file. Gerald Ashford. The trooper who'd written the discredited report. The trooper who'd identified evidence of a 3rd vehicle and then been removed from the case. But it didn't make sense. If Ashford was the killer, why would he write a report pointing to the evidence of his own crime? Unless Ashford hadn't been the killer. Unless the face Ellison had seen was someone who looked very much like Ashford. A relative. A family member who'd had the power to remove Ashford from the investigation and bury his inconvenient findings. Ellison pulled out his phone and searched for information on Gerald Ashford's family. It took several minutes of digging, but he found it. Gerald Ashford's older brother, Daniel Ashford, had been a captain in the state police in 1977, had been the ranking supervisor overseeing the bridge accident investigation. And in 1978, the same year Gerald resigned, Daniel Ashford had been promoted to deputy commissioner. He'd gone on to serve in that position for 20 years before retiring in 1998. It all made sense now. Daniel Ashford had murdered the Roths and Thomas Callahan, had used his position to cover it up, and, when his own brother identified evidence that contradicted the official story, had forced Gerald off the case and then pressured him to resign entirely. "Did you see who it was?" Maeve asked again. "Yes, and I know how to prove it." Ellison looked at the three spirits still present, still watching. "Thank you. Thank you for showing me." The spirits began to fade, but before they disappeared completely, Thomas Callahan's form became more solid for just a moment. He looked at Maeve with an expression of profound love and sadness, then spoke, his voice barely audible. "I love you. I never stopped loving you. Rest now. We'll be together again soon." Then they were gone, and the bridge was just a bridge again. The temperature returned to normal. The radio crackled back to life. And Maeve Callahan was crying. 47 years of grief finally finding release. The next morning, Ellison presented his findings to Lieutenant Grayson. The suppressed evidence, the destroyed vehicles, the discredited reports, and the connection to Daniel Ashford. He left out the spirits and visions, framing everything in terms of documentary evidence and witness testimony. Grayson listened with growing concern. "This is explosive. If what you're saying is true, a deputy commissioner murdered a state senator and covered it up. It's true, and there's enough evidence to reopen the case. Daniel Ashford is still alive. He's 86 years old, living in a nursing facility. Are you prepared for what happens if we pursue this? The media attention, the political fallout, the damage to the department's reputation. Are you prepared for what happens if we don't? How many other cases did Ashford influence? How many other investigations did he corrupt? And what message does it send if we let a killer retire peacefully because he used to wear our uniform?" Grayson was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll forward this to the Cold Case Division and the Internal Affairs Unit. But Ellison, be prepared for resistance. People at the highest levels are going to want this buried again." The investigation took 6 months. 6 months of fighting bureaucracy, dealing with stonewalling from department veterans who'd known Daniel Ashford and facing pressure to drop it. But Ellison had allies too. Cyrus Pennington provided detailed testimony about the evidence suppression. Maeve Callahan's decades of documentation proved invaluable. And eventually they found Gerald Ashford. He was living in Arizona, 74 years old, and haunted by guilt. When Ellison contacted him, the dam broke. Gerald confessed everything. How he'd seen his brother's pickup truck leaving the bridge scene that night. How he'd confronted Daniel, who'd admitted to the murders, claiming the Roths were going to expose corruption that would have destroyed Daniel's career and the careers of several high-ranking officials. How Daniel had threatened to kill Gerald if he didn't back off, and how Gerald had lived in fear and shame for 47 years. With Gerald's testimony, they had enough to make an arrest. Daniel Ashford was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. At 86, he was unlikely to live long enough to go to trial, but that wasn't the point. The point was truth. The point was justice. Maeve Callahan lived to see the indictment filed. She died 3 weeks later, peacefully in her sleep, with a photograph of Thomas on her nightstand. The obituary noted she was preceded in death by her husband and would finally be reunited with him. Ellison attended the funeral. As they lowered Maeve's casket into the ground, he looked up and saw them. 3 translucent figures standing at the edge of the cemetery. Thomas Callahan, Marcus Roth, and Diana Roth. They were fading, becoming less distinct, as if their purpose was finally fulfilled. Thomas raised a hand in farewell, then the 3 spirits dissolved into the morning light, gone at last to wherever spirits go when their unfinished business is complete. That night, Ellison drove across the Muskingum River Bridge. His radio didn't cut out. The temperature didn't drop. The shadows were just shadows, nothing more. The bridge was quiet now, peaceful. The silence was just the absence of sound, not the presence of something desperate to be heard. But Ellison knew he'd never cross that span without thinking about what had happened there. About 3 people who died violently and spent 47 years trying to tell their story. About a widow who never stopped fighting for truth. About the persistence of justice, even when it takes nearly half a century to arrive. He thought about all the bridges he crossed every night, all the roads he patrolled, all the accidents he investigated. How many of them held secrets? How many had stories that deserved to be heard? The radio crackled with dispatch assigning him to a call. A disabled vehicle on Route 33, driver reporting strange mechanical failures. Routine. Normal. The kind of call he'd handled thousands of times. But as Ellison drove toward the location, he couldn't shake the feeling that nothing was truly routine anymore. That beneath the surface of every investigation, every incident, every quiet night on patrol, there might be something deeper, something waiting to be uncovered. The spirits had taught him that. The dead had shown him that truth doesn't expire, that justice delayed is still justice, and that sometimes the most important investigations are the ones everyone else wants to forget. He'd never forget the bridge, never forget the 3 faces in the lightning, never forget the lesson they'd taught him about persistence and truth. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, on all the roads he had yet to patrol, other stories were waiting. Other truths demanding to be heard. Ellison drove on into the night, ready to listen.